The GPS started using my name 3 hours into the drive, and that should have been the moment I turned it off, pulled over, and questioned how navigation software could possibly know something I never told it. But I was alone on a dark highway in rural Oregon, exhausted from 12 hours of driving, and when the voice said, "Sarah, turn right in half a mile," I was too tired to properly process how wrong that was, how deeply wrong, and I followed the instruction like I had followed every other instruction that night. The right turn led me onto a logging road, narrow and overgrown, clearly not maintained for years. My headlights showed deep ruts and fallen branches, and I slowed down, planning to turn around, but the GPS spoke again, still using my name, telling me this was the correct route, that my hotel was only 15 minutes ahead, that I should trust the system because the system was designed to help me. The voice sounded different now, less computerized and more human, almost familiar, like someone I had known once but could not quite place. I checked my phone for cell service and found none, no bars, no connection, yet the GPS continued working perfectly, showing my location as a blue dot moving along roads that the map displayed as blank space. The estimated arrival time kept changing, jumping from 15 minutes to 2 hours to 30 minutes with no pattern, and I realized I had no idea where I actually was anymore, had lost track of my position during the turn onto this logging road. The only guide I had was a device that should not be functioning without signal and definitely should not know my name. The voice started asking me questions after another 10 minutes of driving deeper into the forest. Personal questions. It asked about my divorce, mentioned my ex-husband by name, and wanted to know if I was running away from my problems or toward something new. I did not answer, could not answer, because my throat had closed with fear and confusion about how this device knew details about my life that existed nowhere in any app or account or digital record I had ever created. Then it asked about my sister, the one who died when we were children, the one whose name I never speak aloud because the grief is too old and too deep. The GPS voice said her name clearly, asked if I was driving to visit her grave, and told me it could show me a shortcut, a special route that would take me directly to where she was buried, even though her cemetery was 3 states away and in the opposite direction from where I was supposedly heading. I screamed at the device to shut off, stabbed at the screen trying to close the app, but it would not respond to my touch, just kept displaying that route through blank space, and the voice kept talking, kept using names it should not know, kept revealing information about my past that I had never shared with anyone. It knew about the time I stole money from my mother's purse when I was 12. It knew about the teacher I had an affair with in college. It knew about the baby I gave up for adoption before I met my husband, the secret I buried so deep I sometimes convinced myself it never happened. The road ended at a clearing where a small house stood, lights on in every window, despite the structure looking abandoned, roof sagging and walls covered in moss. The GPS announced I had arrived at my destination, but this was not a hotel, was not anywhere I had ever been or wanted to be. And I understood then that the device had not been guiding me toward the place I asked to go, but toward somewhere else. Somewhere it wanted me. Somewhere that needed me for reasons I did not want to discover. I put the car in reverse, but the engine died, all the lights on my dashboard going dark except for the GPS screen, which glowed brighter, showing the house and a path from my car to the front door. The voice told me to go inside, that someone was waiting for me, that I had been expected for a long time, and I would understand everything once I crossed the threshold and met the person who had been calling me here through technology and coincidence and the careful manipulation of routes that made this meeting inevitable. I sat in my dead car and watched the house, and after a few minutes I saw movement in one of the windows, a figure standing there looking out at me. Too far away to see details, but something about the shape was familiar, the way it stood and the tilt of its head, and the GPS voice said my sister's name again, said she had been waiting, said she never really died, but had been living here all these years, and all I needed to do was walk inside and we could be together again. I knew it was a lie, knew my sister was dead and buried, and this was something else, something that had learned her shape from my memories and was using the GPS to lure me into a situation where I would be trapped and helpless. But the voice was so convincing, so warm and familiar, and I was so tired and so alone. And part of me wanted to believe that technology could somehow undo death, that navigation apps could guide you not just through space, but through time, back to moments you lost and people you would never stop missing. I opened my car door and the GPS immediately started giving me walking directions, step-by-step instructions for how to reach the front door of that house. The voice was excited now, eager, telling me to hurry, that my sister was waiting, that we only had a limited time before the route would close and I would miss my chance to see her again. I took one step toward the house and immediately felt wrong. Felt like I was moving through something thick and resistant, like reality itself was trying to stop me from going forward. That resistance saved me. I stopped walking, turned back to my car, and grabbed my phone from where it sat on the dashboard, still displaying that navigation map. I smashed it against a rock, destroyed the screen completely, and the moment the GPS went dark, I heard screaming from inside the house. Not human screaming, but something that had been pretending to be human and was now revealing its true voice, rage and hunger and frustration that its trap had failed. My car started immediately, every system suddenly functional, and I drove back the way I came, following my tire tracks through the mud until I reached the main highway 2 hours later. I never found out where that house was, or who, or what was waiting inside. Never reported it to police because I had no address or coordinates and knew I sounded insane trying to explain that my GPS had used my dead sister to lure me into the woods. I drive without navigation now, use paper maps and written directions, and I cover the cameras on all my devices because I learned that technology knows too much, sees too much, and sometimes uses that information not to help us, but to exploit our loneliness and grief and willingness to believe that something digital could care about us enough to guide us home, when really it is guiding us toward places where things that are not human wait patiently for the next person who trusts a voice that knows their name. The GPS told me to turn left onto a dirt road that my map did not show, and I should have ignored it. I should have trusted the paper atlas sitting in my passenger seat instead of the glowing screen that promised a shortcut would save me 2 hours on my drive across the Nevada desert. But I was tired and eager to reach my hotel before midnight, so I turned onto that unnamed road and drove into a nightmare that has not ended, even though I escaped 3 days ago. The road started normal enough, packed dirt that my rental car handled easily, winding through desert landscape that looked identical in every direction. Sagebrush and rocks and endless brown earth under a sky so blue it hurt to look at. My phone showed the route clearly, a thin blue line leading through empty space on the map, and the GPS voice calmly told me to continue for 37 miles before turning right onto the highway that would take me to civilization. After an hour, the road got worse. Deep ruts and loose gravel that made my car slide sideways, forcing me to slow to 15 miles per hour while dust clouds rose behind me and turned the world into brown fog. I tried to turn around, but the road was too narrow, steep drops on both sides that would send my car tumbling if I misjudged the edge. The GPS insisted I was still on the correct route, that I just needed to continue forward, that the highway was only 20 miles ahead. But 20 miles became 30, then 40, and the road never improved, never widened, never showed any sign that other vehicles had passed this way recently or ever. The sun started setting and I realized I had not seen another car or person or building since I turned onto this road 4 hours ago. My phone still showed full signal, still displayed that blue line leading forward. But when I tried to call for help, the calls would not connect, just endless ringing that went nowhere. Night fell and my headlights showed things that should not exist on a road people actually used. Animal bones scattered across the path, too many to be natural, arranged in patterns that looked deliberate. Abandoned cars rusted and half buried in sand, doors hanging open like the drivers had left in a hurry and never returned. And signs, hand-painted on wood, warning travelers to turn back, that this road leads nowhere, that people who continue forward are never seen again. I kept driving because stopping felt more dangerous than continuing, because the darkness beyond my headlights was absolute and filled with sounds that deserts should not make. Scraping metal and distant screaming and something large moving parallel to my car, keeping pace but staying just outside the range of my lights. The GPS kept recalculating, the arrival time jumping from 1 hour to 6 hours to 3 hours with no logic, and I realized the device was not guiding me toward my destination, but leading me deeper into empty space that existed between the places maps acknowledge. My gas gauge hit empty around midnight, the engine sputtered and died, and I was stranded in darkness so complete that my headlights seemed to create light rather than reveal what was already there. I tried my phone again, but now it showed no signal despite the battery being full and the screen insisting I was connected to a network that did not exist. The GPS was still active, still showing that blue line, but now it was leading away from any road, pointing into the open desert toward something the map labeled only as destination. That was when I heard the knocking on my car windows. Not random impacts, but deliberate patterns, like something was testing the glass to see if it would break, and when I shined my flashlight toward the sound, I saw handprints pressed against the window. But the hands were wrong, fingers too long and bent at angles that human joints cannot achieve, and behind them were faces that looked almost human, but not quite. Mouths too wide and eyes that reflected light, like animals. I locked myself in the car and waited for dawn, listening to things circle outside, hearing them scrape against the metal and test the door handles and whisper to each other in voices that sounded like wind through broken glass. The GPS screen kept changing, showing routes that led in impossible directions, and I understood then that the device had never been guiding me toward my hotel, but toward this place, this empty spot where things that should not exist wait for travelers who trust technology more than instinct. Dawn came and the things outside vanished, but my car would not start, no matter how many times I turned the key. I started walking back the way I came, following my tire tracks through the dust, but after 2 hours of walking, I found myself back at my car like the road had looped without me noticing. I tried again, walked in the opposite direction this time, and again ended up at the same spot, the desert rearranging itself to keep me trapped. I was rescued on the third day by a helicopter that was searching for a different missing person, someone else who had followed their GPS onto a road that maps do not show. The pilot told me I was 60 miles from any marked road in an area where vehicles are not supposed to be able to travel, and my car was found in a location that their instruments insisted was impossible to reach. They towed my rental out using specialized equipment and asked me questions I could not answer because I did not understand how I got there or why my GPS had shown a route through space that does not exist. The rental company found something strange when they inspected my car. The GPS device had been recording the entire time, saving every turn and every mile. But when they downloaded the data, it showed I had driven through the middle of a mountain range, through solid rock, following roads that would require passing through physical barriers that no road could cross. And in the final hours before my car stopped, the device had recorded me driving in circles around a single point in the desert, around and around the same spot for 6 hours, even though I remembered driving in a straight line the entire time. I do not use GPS anymore. I plan my routes on paper maps and refuse to let technology guide me anywhere, because I learned that some destinations are not places you travel to, but traps that devices lead you into. And the things waiting in those empty spaces are patient and hungry, and always searching for the next driver who trusts a glowing screen more than the growing certainty that they have made a terrible mistake by leaving the known roads behind.
It was almost midnight when I left my friend's house. The city was quieter than usual, like the streets were holding their breath. I remember thinking how rare that was for Los Angeles, for no glaring horns, no echo of sirens, just the low hum of streetlights as I turned onto the 405. My name's Claire Navarro, and that night was supposed to be just another late drive home after dinner. I wasn't nervous, I'd done this route 100 times, my favorite playlist was running, headlights gliding over empty lanes, everything felt fine. Then I saw him. At first, just a pair of headlights in the rearview mirror. Nothing unusual, until I noticed they'd been there for miles. Every turn I made, they followed. Slow when I slowed, closer when I sped up. My gut said maybe it was nothing, but my hands had already tightened on the wheel. When you drive alone at night, you start to feel the road like a heartbeat. Every sound feels louder, the tires, the wind, your own breath. And I swear, in that silence, I could feel those headlights watching me. I tried to shake it off. Maybe he just happened to be going the same way. The freeway was long and empty after all. But then he changed lanes when I did. Not once, nor twice. The first time could have been a coincidence. The second made my pulse skip. So I tested him. I took the next exit, a random one. My plan was to loop around, maybe stop at a gas station with lights and cameras. He didn't just follow, he sped up. That was when the music suddenly felt too loud. I turned it off and the silence made everything worse. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears as I gripped the steering wheel tighter. Every instinct screamed that this wasn't normal. The car was a dark SUV. I couldn't make out the driver's face, but the way he tailed me, matching my every turn, told me enough. I pulled into a well-lit street thinking he'd pass. He didn't. Instead, he slowed down right behind me. Headlights flared, almost blinding me through the mirror. I remember that cold rush in my chest, the one that feels like you're falling even though you're still sitting still. So I did what I'd seen in safety videos. I made random turns, no patterns, no clear direction. I wanted to see if he'd lose interest. But every corner I took, he followed. By the time I hit a red light, he pulled up right beside me. I turned my head, just slightly, and that was the moment I knew this wasn't just road rage. This was something darker. Because he wasn't shouting or honking, he was smiling. Just smiling. Like he was enjoying it. The light turned green, but I couldn't move for a second. My hands felt frozen around the steering wheel. That smile. It wasn't the kind people give out of politeness. It was the kind that said, "I see you. I've already chosen you." I slammed the gas and shot forward. My tires screeched so loud they drowned out the radio. Behind me, the SUV lurched too, keeping pace effortlessly. Every lane I switched into, he was there. Every gap I found, he filled. It wasn't just following anymore, it was chasing. At one point, I caught a glimpse of him through the side mirror. He rolled down his window and yelled something I couldn't hear, but the look in his eyes said everything. He wasn't angry, he was entertained, like it was a game and I was losing. I tried calling 911, but my hands were shaking too much. The first attempt failed. I missed a turn and hit a dead end, a dark stretch near a closed-down diner. That's when his headlights grew brighter, closing in fast. I panicked and reversed, barely missing a trash bin. The tires screeched again, echoing across the empty street. My heart was racing so fast that my breathing came out in short, panicked gasps. I got through to dispatch. 911, what's your emergency? There's a car following me. He's been chasing me for over 15 minutes. Ma'am, can you describe the vehicle? Yes, it's a black SUV, I think a Chevy. He's right behind me. The operator told me to drive toward the nearest police station. I didn't even know where that was, but I kept the line open as I sped down the road. My eyes flicked between the street and the mirror where those headlights still burned. At one intersection, I saw a gas station. I swerved in thinking if there were cameras or people, maybe he'd back off. But when I stopped, he stopped too, right at the entrance. That was when I realized he wasn't trying to scare me. He was waiting for me to get out. I didn't. I locked the doors, pressed the horn, and kept it there. Loud, constant, desperate. The sound finally drew attention. A worker inside peeked out, confused, and just like that, the SUV reversed and sped off into the night. I sat there gripping the steering wheel long after the SUV disappeared. My horn had gone silent, but the ringing in my ears stayed. The gas station worker came closer asking if I was okay, but all I could do was point toward the empty road. My voice wouldn't come out. When the police arrived, I thought maybe they'd find him, the man with the smile that didn't belong on a human face. They took my statement, checked the CCTV footage, and replayed the clips over and over. But his plates were removed. No registration, no identifying marks, Just a shape in the dark, a man who knew how to erase himself. The officer told me something that still echoes in my mind. You're not the first person to report something like this. He explained that similar reports had come in from nearby freeways, a black SUV, late-night pursuit, female drivers, all describing the same thing. A man who followed, watched, then vanished when attention arrived. For days I couldn't sleep. Every engine sound outside made me flinch. My rearview mirror became an obsession. I couldn't drive without scanning it every few seconds. My therapist later called it hypervigilance. I called it survival. A few weeks later, the police reached out again. They'd caught someone matching my description, a man in his early 40s, found with a truck full of women's personal belongings. Phones, IDs, even clothing. He had been using fake plates, hopping between cities, targeting women driving alone. When they showed me his mugshot, my stomach dropped. The same smile, calm, measured, like the whole chase had just been an experiment to him. That night, I deleted Snapchat, every rideshare app, even my GPS history. I stopped driving alone for months, because once you've been hunted, you never really see the road the same way again. The yellow streetlights, the dark turns, the quiet hum of tires and asphalt, they all become reminders that evil doesn't hide in shadows anymore. Sometimes it drives right behind you, headlights on, smiling. It was one of those nights that feel like they'll stretch on forever. Warm air, faint music still ringing in your ears, laughter that refuses to die down even as you're driving through half-empty streets. There were 4 of us in the car. I driving, Jay in the passenger seat, half drunk on cheap champagne and self-confidence, Priya and Ethan in the back arguing about which song to play next. We were returning from Mia's rooftop party, tired but giddy, the kind of happy that only comes when you think nothing bad can touch you. The clock read 1:47 a.m. We were taking the shortcut home on Riverbend Road. It's an old street that winds by the river, quiet and usually deserted at that hour. I remember joking, "If we break down here, I'm calling an Uber and leaving the car." Ethan laughed. "You mean you wouldn't wait for us? How loyal." "I'd send flowers to your funeral," I said, grinning. That's when Jay muttered, "Guys, what the hell is that?" I followed his gaze. The headlights caught movement on the left side of the road. At first it looked like an animal, maybe a dog, but as we got closer, the beam fell on her. A woman sitting on the asphalt, drenched from head to toe, hair plastered to her face, hands slamming against the ground as if she wanted to break them. Her head hit the road once, twice, then again. Priya screamed. I hit the brakes instinctively but didn't stop completely. My hand shook. "Keep driving," Ethan said immediately. "Don't stop, Maya. Not here." Jay's voice dropped to a whisper. "Is she hurt? Or is this some setup?" We'd heard stories of fake accidents on isolated roads, robbers using them to lure people out of their cars. Every nerve in me screamed, "Go!" So I pressed on the accelerator. The woman's face flashed in the mirror, pale, ghostly, twisted with something between pain and madness. For a few seconds, no one spoke. Then Priya said, "We should have stopped. What if she needed help? And what if we got stabbed?" Ethan shot back. "You didn't see her face." Jay ran a hand through his hair. "That was messed up, man. Like she was banging her head. Who does that?" The car was quiet again, except for the low hum of the engine and the river whispering beside us. Then came the turn, the loop that brings you back to the same road. On instinct, I turned that way, ignoring my friend's protest. I needed to know that it wasn't a trap, and that the woman was in serious trouble. As we rounded it, I saw her again. She was lying down this time, motionless. "Holy..." Jay didn't finish. I slowed. This time I couldn't just drive past. Her body was sprawled across the road, one arm extended as though reaching for help. Priya gasped. "She's dead, isn't she?" "Call the cops," I said, my throat dry. "Now." Ethan dialed, stammering as he explained what we'd seen. The dispatcher told us to stay nearby but not to approach. Those next 10 minutes felt like an hour as we sat in the car at the intersection by the main road. We sat in silence, the car headlights trained on the road ahead. None of us even breathed normally. When the police finally arrived, I almost cried from relief. They rushed to her, checked for a pulse, and one of the officers shouted for an ambulance. "She's alive," he called. "Barely." We waited until nearly 3 in the morning, giving our statements. The officers asked the same questions over and over. Did she wave at you? Did you see anyone else? Any vehicles nearby? We hadn't. It was just her, alone. When they took her away, the officer in charge, a tired-looking man named Ruiz, told us, "You probably saved her life by calling when you did. Another 10 minutes, she'd be gone." Not to mention the temperature outside was well near freezing. I didn't sleep that night. None of us did. 2 days later, we got a call from Detective Ruiz. He wanted to thank us again and said the woman had survived. She was 23, an international student from Vietnam. Her name was Lynn Tran. "She doesn't remember anything," Ruiz told us. "Not being there, not the drive, nothing." That sentence sent chills down my spine. Apparently her car was found half submerged a mile upriver. No signs of struggle, no second set of footprints. Her phone was inside, waterlogged. "She's from Fairhaven City," Ruiz said. "That's 60 miles from here. We still don't know what brought her out this way." Priya murmured, "Maybe she tried to—" Ruiz shook his head. "No evidence of that, but she does have an undiagnosed dissociative condition. She forgets chunks of her life, sometimes hours, sometimes days. Could be stress-related." Jay frowned. "But why was she hitting her head?" Ruiz sighed. "We don't know. Her friends say she'd been terrified recently. She mentioned a stalker, some guy from her campus. We're checking into it." Ethan leaned forward. "So maybe the stalker kidnapped her?" "That was one theory," Ruiz said. "Except multiple witnesses saw her driving alone that night. Gas station camera too. No one else in the car." Weeks passed. Billy, the woman, recovered slowly. The police never proved if someone had followed her or if her mind had simply fractured under pressure. When she was finally discharged, Ruiz told us she'd started therapy and was moving in with relatives. "She's lucky," he said. "Most people don't make it out of that river." A month later, the 4 of us met again for a camping trip, our attempt to reset, as Jay called it, but the story kept creeping back into our conversations. Ethan was roasting marshmallows when he said, "You ever think about how easily that could have gone differently? Like, what if we hadn't turned back?" Priya shivered. "Don't say that," Jay added. "Or what if she got up when we stopped the second time? Like, imagine her walking toward us." "Stop," I said, half laughing, half serious. "You're giving me nightmares." He grinned, but there was unease behind it. "Come on, Maya, admit it. It's the creepiest story we'll ever have." Maybe he was right. Even now, when I drive by Riverbend, I slow down without meaning to. The streetlights flicker, the river whispers, and for a split second, I think I see her again. The drenched figure on the road, head bowed, hands trembling. But it's always just my imagination. At least, I hope it is.
I should have known something was wrong when he remembered details I never told him. We met on Facebook in early 2019, connected through a mutual friend group for people interested in photography. His name was David, and his profile showed a handsome man in his late 20s with kind eyes and a warm smile. Someone who seemed genuinely passionate about capturing beautiful moments through a lens. We started chatting about camera equipment and favorite shooting locations. Innocent conversations that felt safe because they revolved around a shared hobby rather than personal information. But slowly, subtly, the conversations shifted. David started asking questions that felt more intimate, wanting to know more about my daily routine. Where I worked, what time I usually got home. I answered without thinking much of it because he framed everything as concern, saying he worried about women traveling alone with expensive camera gear. that he wanted to make sure I was being safe when I went out for photo shoots. It felt protective rather than invasive, like he was looking out for me the way a good friend would. After 3 weeks of messaging, he suggested we meet up for a photography walk through the local botanical gardens. I agreed, excited to finally have someone to share my passion with. Someone who understood the patience it took to wait for perfect lighting or the thrill of capturing a fleeting moment. We set the date for the following Saturday, and I spent the week planning what equipment to bring and which parts of the gardens would have the best opportunities for interesting shots. The night before our meeting, David sent me a message that made my blood run cold. He said he had been thinking about me all day, that he could picture exactly what I was doing at that moment because he had been watching my Instagram stories and noticed I always posted around the same time each evening. Then he described my apartment. Not the inside, but details he should not have known unless he had been there. The color of my front door, the number on my mailbox, the type of car I drove and where I usually parked it. He said he had driven by earlier just to make sure he knew how to get there, that he wanted to surprise me by picking me up instead of meeting at the gardens. I never gave him my address. I never told him what kind of car I drove. The only way he could have known those things is if he had been following me, tracking my movements, studying my patterns without my knowledge or consent. My hand shook as I typed back, asking him directly how he knew where I lived. His response came immediately, casual and unconcerned, saying that it was easy to figure out because I had posted photos from my neighborhood before, that anyone could have found me if they tried hard enough. I blocked him immediately, deleted him from Facebook, and reported his profile to the platform. Then I went through every single photo I had ever posted online, looking for clues about my location, trying to understand what information I had inadvertently shared. There were street signs in the background of some shots, local landmarks that would be recognizable to anyone familiar with the area, even reflections in windows that might have shown my building number. I had been so focused on the artistic aspects of my photography that I never considered how those same images could be used to map out my entire life. The messages started coming from other accounts the next day. Different names, different profile pictures, but the same writing style, the same obsessive attention to detail about my movements. He told me he knew I went to the gym every Tuesday and Thursday morning before work. He knew I stopped at the same coffee shop on my way home. He knew the name of my coworker who sometimes gave me rides when my car was in the shop. Each message contained another piece of my life that I had not shared with him directly. Evidence that he had been watching me far longer than I realized. I contacted the police and filed a report, brought printouts of all the messages and screenshots of his various accounts. The officer who took my statement looked tired and sympathetic, told me that online stalking cases were difficult to prosecute because the person had not technically made any physical threats yet. He advised me to document everything, keep records of all contact, and call 911 immediately if David ever showed up in person. But documentation felt useless when I was living in constant fear, jumping at every car that drove past my apartment, checking over my shoulder every time I left the house. The psychological warfare escalated over the following weeks. David created fake accounts impersonating me, posting photos with captions that made it seem like I was inviting strangers to contact me. He sent messages to my family members claiming we were in a relationship and that I had been lying to them about being single. He left reviews on my workplace's website mentioning me by name, writing things that were just vague enough to not be obviously false, but disturbing enough to make my employers question whether I was bringing personal drama into the office. The worst part was the feeling of being constantly surveilled. He would message me describing what I was wearing that day, what time I had left my apartment, who I had been with. Once he sent me a photo taken from across the street showing me walking to my car, proof that he was there, watching, documenting my every move. I stopped going out alone, asked friends to accompany me everywhere, changed my routine constantly trying to stay unpredictable. But no matter what I did, he always seemed to know where I would be. It took 6 months and multiple police reports before they finally arrested him. He had been doing this to several women simultaneously, building elaborate files on each of us, tracking our movements, creating fake personas to insert himself into our lives. When police searched his apartment, they found folders with our names, printouts of our social media posts organized by date, maps with our addresses marked, even schedules he had created based on patterns he observed. He had turned stalking into a systematic operation, treating us like research subjects in some twisted study. He was charged with multiple counts of stalking and harassment, sentenced to 3 years in prison with a restraining order that would remain in effect long after his release. But even now, 2 years later, I still feel the weight of his surveillance. I deleted all my social media accounts, stopped posting photos online entirely, became hyper-aware of every piece of information that might reveal my location or routine. I moved to a different apartment in a different part of the city, changed jobs, cut ties with anyone who might inadvertently share details about my whereabouts. Because what David taught me was that privacy is an illusion in the digital age. Every photo we post, every check-in we make, every casual mention of our daily activities becomes data that can be collected, analyzed, weaponized by someone with enough obsession and free time. He never touched me physically, never broke into my home, never committed the kind of violence that most people imagine when they think of stalkers. But he violated me in ways that felt just as invasive, turning my own online presence into a tool for psychological torture, proving that sometimes the most dangerous predators are the ones who never have to leave their computers to destroy your sense of safety. The friend request came from someone named Tyler, a profile with few photos but mutual connections to people from my high school. His message was friendly and casual, saying he had just moved back to town after years away and was trying to reconnect with old classmates. I did not remember him specifically, but our graduating class was large and my memory of those years was hazy at best, so I accepted the request without much thought. It seemed harmless, just another face in the endless scroll of social media acquaintances. We started chatting occasionally, surface-level connections about what had changed in town since he left, where the good places to eat were now, whether anyone from school still lived in the area. Tyler seemed nice enough, asking questions that felt like genuine interest rather than anything suspicious. He told me he was working remotely as a web designer, that he had always been shy in high school, which was why I probably did not remember him, that he was hoping to make new friends now that he was back home. Everything about the interaction felt normal, boring even. Just two people making small talk about a shared hometown. After about 2 weeks of casual messaging, Tyler asked if I wanted to meet up for coffee. He suggested a place near the mall, public and safe, somewhere I had been dozens of times before. I hesitated at first because meeting people from the internet still felt risky, despite how common it had become. But I looked at his profile again, saw those mutual friends, read through our previous conversations that had been perfectly appropriate, and decided it would be fine. We set a time for Saturday afternoon, and I told my roommate where I was going and when to expect me back, taking the basic safety precautions that every woman learns to follow. Saturday arrived and I drove to the coffee shop, parked in the busy lot, and went inside. Tyler had said he would be wearing a blue jacket, but as I scanned the room, I did not see anyone matching his profile photos. I ordered a drink and sat down, checking my phone for messages. 5 minutes passed, then 10, then 15. I texted Tyler asking if he was running late, but the message showed as delivered and never got a read receipt. After half an hour of waiting, I accepted that I had been stood up and left, annoyed at the wasted time but not particularly concerned. That evening, my phone started blowing up with notifications. Tyler had posted on his Facebook timeline, tagging me in a message that said we had just had an amazing first date and he could not wait to see me again. But we had never met. I had been sitting alone in that coffee shop the entire time. I immediately commented, correcting him, saying we never actually connected, but he started messaging me privately with a completely different tone. He said he had been watching me the whole time, that he was parked across the street and saw me walk in, that he wanted to see how I looked when I thought nobody was paying attention. The realization hit me like ice water. Tyler had never intended to meet me inside. He had set up the coffee shop as a way to observe me without my knowledge, to study how I moved and acted when I believed I was alone. I felt violated in a way I could not fully articulate, knowing that while I sat there innocently waiting, someone had been watching me from a distance, evaluating me like prey. I blocked him immediately, reported his profile, and tried to convince myself it was over. But it was not over. Tyler created new accounts faster than I could block them, each with slightly different names and photos, always finding ways to send me messages. He started showing up places I frequented, never approaching directly, but always visible in my peripheral vision. I would see him at the grocery store standing at the end of my aisle, at the gym on a treadmill with a clear view of where I was exercising, at restaurants sitting alone at a table where he could watch my section. Every time I noticed him, he would smile and wave like we were old friends, like this behavior was completely normal. I went to the police with screenshots of all his messages and a list of the places he had appeared, but they said without direct threats or physical contact, there was little they could legally do. They suggested I document everything and consider getting a restraining order, but restraining orders require knowing someone's real identity and address, and Tyler had been careful to never reveal genuine information about himself. The profile details were fake. The story about moving back to town was fake. Even the name Tyler was likely not real. He was a ghost who had inserted himself into my life and refused to leave. The stalking continued for months, a constant background presence that made me feel watched and unsafe everywhere I went. He learned my schedule, knew when I left for work and when I came home, what route I drove and where I parked. Once I found a note on my windshield that just said, "I see you." No signature or explanation needed. Another time he left a coffee cup on my doorstep. The same drink I had ordered that day at the shop where this all started. A reminder that he was always paying attention. The breaking point came when he messaged me claiming he had been inside my apartment while I was at work. He described my bedroom in detail, the color of my comforter, the photos on my nightstand, the books stacked beside my bed. I called the police immediately, and this time they took it seriously, sent officers to check for signs of forced entry. They found nothing, no broken locks or disturbed windows. But that almost made it worse because it meant either he had managed to get in without leaving evidence, or he had somehow obtained photos of my private space through other means. I moved out of that apartment within a week, broke my lease and relocated to a different part of the city without telling anyone except my closest family members where I was going. I deleted all of my social media accounts, changed my phone number, started using a different name at coffee shops and restaurants when they asked for orders. For 6 months, I lived in paranoid isolation, afraid that any stranger who made eye contact might be Tyler in another disguise, that any friend request might be him trying to worm his way back into my life. Eventually, the stalking stopped, or at least I stopped noticing it. Maybe Tyler moved on to another victim. Maybe he got bored when I made myself invisible. Maybe he is still out there somewhere watching and I have just become numb to the signs. I will never know because I never learned who he really was or what he actually wanted beyond the obvious thrill of control and fear. The police never found him, never made an arrest, never gave me closure or justice. What I learned from Tyler is that the internet has made it easier than ever for predators to create false identities and insert themselves into strangers' lives. A friend request, a few mutual connections that might be fake accounts he created, some basic knowledge of my hometown that anyone could find online, and suddenly he has access to my trust and my routine and my sense of security. He turned social media, a tool designed to connect people, into a weapon for surveillance and psychological torture. And when I finally escaped, it was not because the system protected me, but because I was willing to abandon my entire digital existence to make myself disappear.
The cabin keeper. The ranger told me the cabin was abandoned, that I could use it as an emergency shelter during the unexpected blizzard that had closed all the mountain roads and left me stranded 40 miles from the nearest town. He did not tell me why it was abandoned, why a perfectly good structure with a working fireplace and intact roof would be left to rot in the middle of valuable recreational forest. And I was too cold and desperate to ask questions that might have saved what remains of my sanity. The first 3 days were fine, almost pleasant in the way that isolation can be when you know it is temporary and rescue is coming as soon as the roads clear. I had enough food in my car for a week if I rationed carefully, and the cabin had a stack of firewood that suggested someone had planned to stay here for an extended period before abandoning the place mid-preparation. I read books on my phone while the battery lasted, watched the snow fall through windows that were surprisingly clean for a structure that was supposedly abandoned, and tried not to think about the scratches on the inside of the door that looked like they had been made by fingernails rather than animal claws. On the fourth day, I found the journal hidden under a floorboard that had come loose near the fireplace. The entries were dated from 2 winters ago, written by someone named Marcus, who had come to the cabin for a solo retreat and gotten trapped by weather just like I had. His early entries were mundane observations about the beauty of the forest and the peace of solitude, but around day 7 the tone shifted, became paranoid and obsessive, filled with descriptions of something watching him from the tree line, something that only appeared when he was at his hungriest, when his supplies had dwindled and his body had started consuming itself. I should have left the cabin then, should have risked the storm, and started walking toward civilization despite the sub-zero temperatures and the certainty of frostbite. But I convinced myself that Marcus had simply gone crazy from isolation, that his journal was the product of cabin fever and nothing more, and I settled in for another night by the fire, rationing the last of my granola bars and trying to ignore the growing emptiness in my stomach that felt less like hunger and more like something hollow opening up inside me. The thing appeared on the 5th night, standing at the edge of the clearing where firelight met darkness. I saw it through the window, impossibly tall and thin, body covered in what looked like frost or pale fur, and a face that was almost human except for the mouth that opened too wide and the eyes that reflected light like an animal's, but with an intelligence that was distinctly and terribly aware. It did not move closer, just stood there watching, and I understood with absolute certainty that it was not trying to get in because it did not need to, that the cabin was not shelter from the thing but a trap it had set, and I had walked into it just like Marcus had 2 years ago. I read the rest of his journal that night, read how the hunger had driven him to consider things that civilized people should never consider, how he had started seeing the forest animals not as wildlife but as food sources, how that perspective had gradually shifted until he was no longer thinking about animals but about the other hikers he knew would eventually come looking for him. The final entry was dated 3 weeks after he arrived, and it simply said, "I understand now what it wants. The cabin is not abandoned. It has a keeper, and the keeper is always hungry. The food ran out on day 6, and with it went the last of my ability to pretend this was a normal survival situation. The hunger was not gradual, did not build slowly the way it should have, but hit me all at once like a switch had been flipped, transforming my body into something that existed only to consume, only to feed, only to satisfy a craving that had nothing to do with nutritional need and everything to do with something ancient and wrong that the cabin had been built to contain or maybe to cultivate. I started having dreams about meat, about the taste and texture of flesh that I had never eaten but somehow remembered, and when I woke, I found myself standing at the window staring at the tree line where the thing still waited, patient and knowing. Like it understood that transformation takes time and hunger is the catalyst that breaks down what we think we are and reveals what we have always been underneath. On day 7, I stopped thinking of the thing outside as separate from myself. I understood that it was not waiting to attack, but waiting to welcome, that the cabin was not a shelter I had stumbled into, but a chrysalis I had been drawn to. And the hunger that consumed me was not trying to destroy me, but to remake me into something that could survive in places where human morality and human weakness had no power. I am writing this on day 8, using the last of my phone's battery, because some fragment of my former self wants to leave a warning, even though I know it will not matter. The ranger will eventually come to check on me, will find the cabin empty, just like he found it empty after Marcus, and he will tell the next desperate traveler that the structure is abandoned and safe to use, because that is what the forest requires. That is how the thing in the tree line feeds, and the cabin will always need a keeper to maintain it through the winter until the hunger completes its work, and another person learns that some shelters are not meant to protect you from the wilderness, but to prepare you to become part of it. If you are reading this, you are already inside. The door locks from the outside now, and the thing at the edge of the clearing is not something separate from you, but something you are becoming, and by the time you understand this truth, the hunger will have already started its work, and you will realize that the scratches on the inside of the door were not made by someone trying to escape, but by someone trying to hold on to the last pieces of humanity before they finally let go and walked into the forest to take their place among the watchers who wait for the next keeper to arrive.
Hey, my name is Andrew. You may not know me, but I'm a recognized chef in my country. I don't want to brag, but I'm really very good. I've been a judge on many reality shows. People know me quite well, not by the name Andrew, but by my stage name, which, for obvious reasons, I would not like you to know. But I'll just tell you this story so you can learn from my mistakes. You see, I was one of the best chefs in the world. As a teenager, I didn't even like to cook. I loved people cooking for me, but I didn't know how to cook at all. That is until one Tuesday night. That night, I decided that I was never again going to go to a restaurant or eat something given to me by someone I didn't know. No, after what I experienced that night, I decided I would be the one to prepare my own food. I told them the story from the beginning. The day had already started out weird. I was in a hurry to meet my girlfriend and go get something to eat together, until a car ran a red light and almost ran me over. I got out of the crash intact, but I fell off my bike, and let me tell you, it was a miracle I didn't hit my head. Before what had happened, the driver got out worried and came running towards me. He appeared to be a middle-aged man, polite, relaxed, and friendly, although I could see on his face that he really felt guilty for having caused an accident. The man checked that I was okay and asked me if I needed anything. He also told me that I was free to write down his license plate and sue him, as it was the right thing to do for what had happened. Laughing, I stood up and told him that it wouldn't be necessary. What had happened was an accident. It could happen to anyone. Grateful, but somewhat confused, the man smiled at me and left, telling me that he was late for work, but that he would be eternally grateful for my generosity. Soon after, I met up with my girlfriend and we started looking for a place to eat. We looked everywhere, but there was nothing new. Everywhere we went, we could find burgers and fries or pizza. We wanted something different. Halfway there, as if sensing our dissatisfaction, a man stopped us and invited us to eat at a fancy restaurant called The Feast. To be honest, I didn't know it, but as it was a hidden and quite exclusive place, we agreed to enter the mysterious black door that the man indicated and went in. As we entered, I immediately noticed the peculiar atmosphere of the place. The dim lights and soft music created a peaceful atmosphere, but something in the air was not quite right. I couldn't put my finger on exactly what it was, but an uneasy feeling settled in my stomach. My girlfriend, on the other hand, seemed very calm. She was casually talking to me and telling me that she liked the place. I admit, they gave me some peace of mind, and we were able to get on with the evening. We were seated at a table by the window, and a friendly waiter handed me the menu. There was a wide variety of exquisite dishes, but I decided to go for what I knew I couldn't go wrong. When in doubt, I opted for steak. A safe choice, I thought. As I waited for my food, I looked around. The restaurant was full of people, but everyone seemed to be immersed in their own worlds. There was no laughter or lively conversation, just murmurs and muffled words. I also noticed that there were no people our age. They all looked to be in their 50s and 60s. I decided to just ignore what was going on and started eating. The first bite of steak confirmed my expectations. It was delicious, tender and perfectly cooked. However, as I progressed through my meal, I began to notice something strange. The flavor was becoming more and more intense, almost overwhelming. I tried to remember the last time I enjoyed a meal so much, but something didn't add up. It was then that I noticed that the people around me were looking at me. Their stares were fixed as if they knew something I didn't. I felt uncomfortable, even dirty, but I decided to ignore the stares and finish my dinner. However, the more I ate, the harder I found it to swallow. The taste, once delicious, was becoming bitter and unpleasant. My girlfriend, on the other hand, didn't seem to notice the stares of the people, but she did notice the taste of the food. She was disgusted and enraged, like a person who had just been ripped off. She wanted to make a fuss, go after the chef and not pay for the food. I told her it was not a good idea, that the environment seemed dangerous, and to at least let me finish my meal. I still don't understand why I asked her to do that, but today I can deduce that if I hadn't, my life would be different. Minutes passed, and finally, I decided to stop eating. I looked around and noticed that the atmosphere in the restaurant had changed. The music had stopped, and the murmur of conversation had died down completely. People were still looking at me, but now their faces expressed more than curiosity. They were desperation, anxiety, nerves. Something was wrong with these people, and neither my girlfriend nor I could belong a second longer. Before we left, I got up to go to the bathroom. I needed a moment to recover. As I walked in, I noticed that the room was cold, too cold to be normal. I looked in the mirror and saw my reflection pale and sweaty. My eyes showed a mixture of fear and confusion. I was ready to go back to the kitchen and tell my girlfriend that we were leaving. But before I did, to my surprise, someone grabbed my arm. A man, one of the customers, was next to me, grabbing me. At what moment did he appear? Was he in a cubicle in the bathroom and I was so absorbed in my thoughts that I didn't see him? I asked the man to let go immediately, but he didn't. I would even say he squeezed harder. His eyes were lost in mine. The man was drooling and had a terrifying face, full of perversion and evil. But boy, where are you going in such a hurry? The night has just begun. Disgusted by his words, I tried to hit him, but it was useless. With a sharp blow to the stomach, I fell to the ground, surrendered, and without the possibility to continue fighting. Realizing that I could not defend myself, the man got on all fours and approached me as if I were a dog, sniffing my face, obviously. My only possible reaction to something so bizarre was to cry. I didn't understand what was happening or why it was happening to me. In my moment of confusion, the man threw me to the ground and on top of me began to choke me with his two hands. His gaze was more obsessive and disturbing than ever. It was as if he was in a trance, lost in what he was doing to me. Little by little, I began to lose the fight. I started to run out of air and was resisting less and less until something else happened. From the restaurant, I heard my girlfriend's desperate cry for help. Filled with new energy, I managed to land a knee to the man's private parts and knock him out. In a hurry, I ran to the bathroom door, and when I opened it, looking for my girlfriend, I was shocked at the sight. Everyone in the restaurant went from looking at her to looking at me. They were all standing around, looking obsessive and sickly like the man in the bathroom. They all began to ignore my girlfriend and slowly approached where I was, ready to do who knows what to me. Cornered, I fell against the wall in fear until a man dressed as a chef stepped in the middle. This was the man from before. He almost ran me over with his car. Please, let this one go. I'll make sure you have a replacement for the situation. His voice had changed. He sounded more professional, reserved, and cold. After saying this, people returned to their seats, and he looked at me and my girlfriend, who joined us, still terrified. I hope you will excuse them. These are people from very wealthy circles. They are very intelligent, but once a year, they go with their instincts, and we throw them a special party here. What do you mean? Escorting me out, the man continued speaking. I'm sorry, you have fallen into a little trap of my people. In this place, we do not have the same diet as you. It is a special place for special and distinguished people. I recommend that you do not come here again tonight, as they were waiting for dessert to arrive. Dessert? What are you talking about? I don't understand. Honey, I think he means you. That means that the meat we ate? At that moment, I understood everything. During that night, I had eaten human flesh. And that man who had stopped me in the bathroom, that man wanted to eat me alive.
At this realization, I grabbed my girlfriend by the arm and ran away as fast as I could. As I did so, I could see how the waiter simply looked at me with a smile and returned to the restaurant, satisfied. Once we arrived at my house, we considered calling the police, but what was that going to make any sense? It was the statement of two 18-year-olds accusing a place full of millionaires of conspiring to eat human flesh. Instead, we just spent the night puking in my house, considering how close we came to being dessert for some millionaire psychopaths who wanted to eat human flesh for fun. It's been several years since that day. My girlfriend and I are still together, but we don't talk about it anymore. We feel it's reliving a ghost we don't want to remember. Maybe it was the coward's way out. For sure we would have helped many people so that this does not happen to them, but we were afraid to do it, and no one can blame us for that. Since that day, I don't trust anyone anymore. As I told you, I am the one who makes the food. I will never again be willing to eat food that I don't see how it is prepared on the spot. To have eaten human flesh, even once, is more than I will ever be willing to do in my entire life. Fall had always been my favorite season. I don't want to sound old-fashioned, but there's something about the falling leaves and the perfect temperature that I've always loved. In the summer, it's hot. In the winter, it's cold. And in the spring, too hot for my taste. Admittedly, having a house in the woods helped me love fall so much. Every year, my family and I would take long walks in the woods surrounding our house. This year was to be no exception. Nothing indicated that fall was going to end the way it did. It just happened. It all started with a walk. Nothing more normal than that. We walked along the path we already knew. We had walked it hundreds of times. Everything seemed normal until we noticed the old woman. At first, we didn't think anything too strange, just an old woman walking a few meters away from us. She seemed lost. My children looked at her curiously, and my wife suggested that maybe we should help her. Surely her family was looking for her. I decided to approach the old woman to see if she needed help. I told my wife to go on with the children and that I would catch up with them in a moment. I thought maybe she needed guidance or that she had lost her way. I approached her with a smile and asked her if everything was okay. But what happened next was the beginning of the end. The old woman stopped dead in her tracks when I was a few steps away from her. She didn't answer me right away. She just stood there watching me. It was then that she smiled. It was not a friendly smile, not a smile that inspired confidence. It was a weird grimace like she was about to do something bad to me. It's very rare to explain. Definitely one of those things that you have to be there to feel it. But at that moment, I felt fear. I know it doesn't make sense, that she was just a lost old woman, but something in that person's eyes terrified me. Without saying a word, the old woman began to laugh, softly. Her trembling hand went to her jacket and, with a slow, deliberate movement, she opened it. Inside her jacket, hanging by several threads, I saw what appeared to be the heads of several dead birds. The smell emanating from inside was nauseating, a mixture of rot and death that made me instinctively recoil. The old woman was laughing more and more, and I was completely confused. Scared and confused. Not knowing what to do, I slowly backed away, trying not to lose my composure. I didn't want my children to see what I had just witnessed. I didn't want my wife to be alarmed. I walked away from the old woman and walked quickly towards them. When I saw them, we kept walking, not saying a word about the old woman. My wife noticed my tense expression, but I decided to lie to her, saying that the old woman had only been talking gibberish and that everything was fine. We left the place quickly, and I thought I would never see the lady again. I was wrong. I started to see that old lady much more often. At first, it was a casual encounter. I would meet her walking near my work. I would see her as I passed by my house or when I was riding my bike. She was just standing on the road watching me as if she knew I was about to pass by. It was true that I had a very routine life, but would an old lady learn my routine perfectly well? I put that idea out of my mind telling myself that it made no sense. I got even more worried when my children also started to notice something strange. They also saw her walking near the house or the school, but I didn't know how to explain to them what was going on. I told them that she was just an older woman who was probably a little confused and that she was harmless. My son was still scared, but my younger daughter was confident and full of courage. I just wanted them to be calm, and that was my big mistake. They were not supposed to be calm, and a few nights later, I would find out in the worst possible way. That night, as we were preparing dinner, a strange smell began to fill the dining room. At first, it was subtle, but it became unmistakable. A pungent, strong smell like a mixture of rotting garlic and dampness. My wife wrinkled her nose, wondering if I had left something bad in the kitchen, but I knew the source was not in our refrigerator. I decided to investigate, looking for the source of the smell. That's when I noticed the footprints. They were small, barefoot, and marked with mud that extended from the back door to the inside of the house. I began to get very nervous as I noticed how they were heading straight down the hallway that led to the bedrooms. My son was at a friend's house, but my daughter was still in her room, and that terrified me. I grabbed a metal iron I had in the garage, using it as a makeshift weapon. The smell of garlic intensified as I approached my daughter's room. I reached the door to her room and pushed it carefully, and what I saw inside chilled me. The old woman was sitting there on the edge of my daughter's bed. She was whispering something in her ear. My daughter was laying down, but awake. Her toys were on the floor as if whatever she was playing with had been interrupted. She was uncomfortable, but trying not to be afraid and handle the situation on her own. This was my fault. Fury and terror came over me in equal parts. I screamed, ordering her to get away from my daughter. The old woman looked up and stared at me. She laughed out loud and stroked my daughter's hair with her rotten, filthy fingers. She said nothing, just stood there touching my daughter's hair. That's when I lost control. I couldn't contain my rage. I picked up the iron and slammed it against the floor hard, hoping the noise would scare her away. The old woman didn't flinch, just stared at me and feigned an impressed look on her face. She was teasing me. My screams rang through the house, and my wife ran into the room, encountering the scene. She screamed too, asking the old woman to let go of our daughter, that she wouldn't make things worse. Calmer, she took out her cell phone and dialed the police, demanding that someone come immediately. As she spoke to the operator, the old woman slowly stood up, not taking her eyes off me. Her expression had changed. She was no longer smiling. She let go of my daughter and walked past us to leave the room. I thought about grabbing her arm and pulling her out, but as soon as I got close, she held out a small knife.
This was for you. Thank your wife for calling the pigs.
I stopped before I touched her and let her just walk out of our house. When the police arrived, the old woman had already left. The cops tried to look for her, investigated the area, and went all over the road, but found nothing. The old woman probably took another path, going deeper into the forest. A few days after the incident, I tried to get back to normal. I swear I tried. I was still alert, but I needed to distract myself. I decided to go out with some friends for a bike ride, taking advantage of the cool fall air. It was getting dark, but it was still daylight, enough that the road wasn't dangerous. For a moment, I felt good, as if I could put everything that had happened behind me. I remember thinking that maybe it was all over. Maybe the old woman had gotten scared and wasn't coming back. But that tranquility didn't last long. Suddenly, a car came out of nowhere, crossing the lane and hitting us head on. Everything happened so fast that I barely had time to react. I felt the impact, the sharp pain coursing through my body as I flew through the air and landed on the asphalt. After that, I remember only for moments. Everything became confusing. Screams, sirens, the metallic taste of blood in my mouth. And after that, darkness. When I woke up in the hospital, the first thing I knew was that 2 of my friends had not survived. The severity of my injuries was minor compared to the head-on collision they had suffered. At the time, I thought it was all the work of a drunk driver or someone who didn't know how to drive. When I asked the police who had done it, They told me that they had found the culprit. It was an old woman. It was that old woman. In her statement, she claimed that it was an accident and that she had lost control of the vehicle. She didn't count on the fact that a film was recovered where it was clear that it was intentional. I decided to sue her to try to get some kind of justice, and to this day, the lawsuit is still going on. I never understood why that old lady did everything she did to us. I was 10 years old when we moved into that house. It was big, bigger than we were used to. My parents always said it was an amazing opportunity, that we would finally have the space we always wanted. But from day one, something didn't feel right. I didn't know how to explain it. My parents were busy unpacking boxes, and my oldest sister was excited that she would finally have her room. But I couldn't shake a strange feeling. Something about that house was making me nervous. The room I shared with my sister was down the hall on the second floor. The room was across the hall, which was a good thing. Imagine how scary it would be to see the whole hallway. The door was always ajar. I didn't like to see out of the room, but I needed the door half open so some light would come in. It wasn't fear that I felt at first. It was more like discomfort. The first few nights, every time I opened my eyes, I forced myself to close them quickly. Something told me I didn't want to see beyond the darkness of the hallway, but I couldn't help it. And then, one night, I saw it. The light in the hallway began to flicker on and off. It flickered as if someone was fiddling with the switch. It couldn't be my sister. She was sleeping soundly in the bed next to me. I tried to ignore it. I turned over, pulling the covers over my head. It was just a light, I told myself. At that moment, I didn't try to look for logical explanations. I didn't try to deal with it rationally or even scream for my parents. I was only 10 years old. I was terrified and paralyzed. I kept covering my head until at some point I fell asleep. The next morning, I told my sister what had happened. Her reaction was what I expected. She didn't believe me. She laughed and said to me that I had probably dreamt it. She never woke up for anything. She was the heaviest sleeper anyone could imagine. That bothered me, but I tried not to dwell on it. Maybe she was right, and I had imagined it. That night, I woke up again. This time, it wasn't the light that woke me, but a soft sound, as if something was scraping the floor. I sat up in bed, and when I looked out into the hallway, I saw it again. The light was flickering, but now it was flickering slower. On, off, on, off. My eyes wouldn't leave the door, hoping to see someone, one of my parents, or something wrong with the light. Anything that could explain what was happening. I spoke softly to my sister. I whispered her name several times, but she didn't move. I knew she would believe me if I woke her up, but if there was someone on the other side of the door, she would be alerted if she screamed. So I stayed quiet, watching the light continue its slow, disturbing rhythm. I couldn't sleep anymore that night, but when dawn broke, I tried to talk to her again. This time, she didn't even bother to answer me. My mom, when I mentioned to her about the light, told me that maybe there was a malfunction in the electrical system. But it wasn't just the light that bothered me. It was something else, something I didn't know how to explain to them. It wasn't just the lights. Something else was going on in that house. One night, everything intensified. I woke up as usual, but this time, the hallway light was on all the way. It wasn't flickering, it was just on. I stared at it, waiting for something to happen. Nothing. Nothing happened. So I decided that maybe it was time to try to sleep. Maybe whatever was going on was over. Suddenly, I heard a noise next to me, and I opened my eyes again. It was as if someone was breathing. I quickly turned to my sister, thinking maybe she was awake. But no, she was sleeping soundly, as usual. Suddenly, the hallway was filled with darkness. Not because the light had gone out, but because there was a shadow behind the door. I stayed hidden in my sheets for a few seconds until the shadow disappeared. At that very moment, I got out of bed and went to the door to close it. It was dark, but we were safe now. I lay down, trying to calm down, but that's when I looked at the door and noticed something. The door was open. How could it have happened? I had closed it a second ago. I lay still in bed, turned my back to the door, and closed my eyes as tightly as I could, trying to ignore it, to pretend I didn't care. But then I felt it. Something or someone was next to me. At first, I thought it was my sister, that maybe she had woken up from all the noise I had made and had come to my bed. I spoke to her a little louder, surprised that she had woken up, but suddenly I heard her voice, confused, coming from her bed, away from me. I pulled the sheets off me, scared, expecting to see someone beside me. But there was no one. Fear ran through my body, and just then, something grabbed my foot. I screamed, and my sister woke up immediately, alarmed. She also screamed when she saw me struggling with whatever it was that had me trapped. I tried to break free, but the invisible hand was pulling me forcefully to the edge of the bed. I broke free and got out of bed to hug my sister. She tried to turn on the light, but the lights in the room wouldn't come on. The door had slammed shut, and though we pounded desperately, we couldn't open it. We were stuck there, both of us crying and screaming for help. Suddenly, as we pounded on the door, I saw something that paralyzed me. In the distance, next to my bed, a figure began to materialize. It was not human. She was tall, too tall, and although her body was a black shadow, there was something on her face that I couldn't ignore. Glowing red eyes that watched us without moving. I felt short of breath. I clutched my chest, unable to breathe, and fell to the ground. My sister also fell beside me, choking. At first I thought it was fear, but then I realized that we were both experiencing the same thing. Something was taking the air out of us. I tried to speak, but I couldn't. The pain in my chest intensified. The pain in my chest was intensifying as if something was crushing me. Everything around me began to fade, and before I lost consciousness, the last thing I saw was my parents coming through the door. At first, they were confused and asking us what happened. I looked to the side and the black shadow was gone. My mother was hugging my sister, who seemed to be catching her breath, and my father was making sure I could breathe well. When my father lifted me, I couldn't help but look up. I was up. The shadow from before was above us. My mom looked at my face in surprise and also saw the ceiling. She was as terrified as I was. I screamed that there was something on the ceiling, and my dad almost let go of me from fear. Something was staring at us from above. It could stretch out, it could attack us, but it didn't. It just watched us. My parents pulled us out of the room just in time. I felt them lift me, but everything was blurry. I could barely see, but I knew something had changed when I heard my mom scream. My dad had seen it too, if only for a second. I could tell by the way he held me as if he was as scared as I was. That night, my parents watched the security camera footage. I didn't see them, but I heard his screams. They stayed up late, watching and rewinding the videos. From what they told me, the hallway camera showed something pulling me out of bed, and just before the camera stopped recording, you could see the shadows moving in the hallway. My dad didn't say anything else after that. He didn't mention the lights again. He didn't talk about the shadow being or try to come up with a rational explanation. I knew he felt guilty for not doing something sooner. From that night on, we never slept in that room again. We slept with our parents for a few days until they finally decided that we should move out of the house. We moved into our grandparents' house for a while, and a few months later, my parents sold the house. They bought a much smaller apartment, but no one complained. We just wanted to be away from that place and not think about it anymore. Now it was someone else's problem. This story is based on the real-life crime of Ana Ayala, a woman who faked finding a human finger in a bowl of chili in a Wendy's restaurant. The case exploded in 2005 and sparked nationwide disgust. Ayala claimed that while eating, she bit into something unusual and pulled out a human finger floating among the beans and meat. Her complaint was dramatic, and for a time, it seemed Wendy's was facing one of the most grotesque food contamination scandals in fast food history.
But the entire story was a lie. Investigators found no evidence that the finger came from the restaurant or any of its employees. In fact, the finger had been given to Ayala by an acquaintance who had lost it in an industrial accident at an asphalt plant. She used it as part of a scheme to extort money from Wendy's. For weeks, she maintained the deception in front of cameras and prosecutors, while the company destroyed chili supplies and suffered massive financial losses. What began as a tale of horror turned out to be a twisted hoax. It was around 11:45 p.m. I was doing the final cleanup at the Wendy's on MacArthur Boulevard. I was the night manager, which just meant I had to close the place down, count the drawers, lock everything, and make sure the stoves were cold. The other employees had already left. A couple of them stayed outside, chatting in the parking lot, probably killing time before heading home. It had been 3 weeks since the chili finger incident. Corporate had swept it under the rug fast, but I was the one who spotted the lie. I knew the chili came pre-cooked in sealed bags. There was no way a finger could end up in it without someone putting it there. I filed the initial report, told the district manager, and days later, Ana Ayala was arrested. I figured that was the end of it. Turned out, it wasn't. First thing that was weird, the back door wouldn't latch right. I always double-checked it before locking the main entrance. And it looked closed, but it was just barely off the frame. I pushed it hard until I heard it click. Then I checked the cameras like I always did. Everything looked fine. At 12:03 a.m., I went to the break room to grab my keys and head out. That's when I noticed my car from the window. The back windows looked off. I walked out to check. Both tires slashed, deep, clean cuts, no tread left. I scanned the lot. The guys who were outside earlier were gone. My phone was inside on the charger. I didn't hear anything. No footsteps, no voices, no cars, just the kind of silence that makes your ears ring. Something about it didn't sit right. This wasn't random vandalism. Someone wanted me stuck. I went back inside to call for a ride, but the second I stepped through the back door, it slammed behind me, hard. The wind couldn't have done that. I didn't hear anyone running. No lock click. Just silence again. I reached for my phone. The charger was empty. I knew I had left it charging right there on the table. It hadn't fallen. It was just gone. I kept my flashlight on my keychain, switched it on, and walked back toward the storage hall behind the kitchen. That's when I noticed it. The walk-in freezer door was wide open. We always kept it shut. I walked over slowly, every step echoing too loud on the tile. The cold air poured over my shoes. Before I got too close, I heard something. Wet breathing, ragged, coming from inside, like someone had run a marathon and couldn't catch their breath. I didn't move. I aimed the flashlight in the freezer. Nothing. Shelves, boxes, cold air. No person, just that breathing. Then the sound came again, but behind me this time. I spun around. Still nothing. But something had changed. The break room door was open. I swear I shut it. I stood still for a second too long. Then I heard something fall behind me. Inside the freezer. A metal tray maybe. Loud, sharp, like it had been shoved off a shelf. A metallic click from somewhere above me. I pointed the flashlight upward. The ceiling vent near the stock shelf was swinging slightly. There was a black smudge on the edge. A shoe print. I bolted for the office, locked the door behind me, tried the landline. Dead. I heard something near the front counter. Then again. A dragging sound. Plastic bags? Shoes sliding? I backed away from the desk, trying not to make a noise. There was a smell, too. Something sour like old meat. I crouched under the desk and stayed there for maybe 10 minutes. The sound stopped. I slowly got up, opened the door, and stepped out. Kitchen was clear. Dining area, too. I kept the flashlight low, hands shaking.
I walked to the front. Something felt wrong, like the room was waiting. I saw it on the counter, right where we placed the orders. A finger. Clean, pale, no blood. Perfectly preserved. It hadn't been there before. It looked just like the one from the chili incident. And then I remembered what the cops told us later off the record. Her friend had lost 2 fingers, not one. There was still another one unaccounted for. I stood there frozen. I felt exposed. The store felt too quiet. No humming from the fridge, no buzz from the lights, like everything had shut down without me noticing. I backed up slowly. I didn't hear her enter. I didn't hear anything. I felt it. It hit me like lightning. A shock in my back that made every muscle in my body snap tight. I dropped, twitching on the tile. Couldn't move, couldn't scream, just the sound of plastic on rubber. Someone wearing kitchen gloves. My eyes watered, my jaw locked, my chest tightened. My heart was pounding, but nothing else worked. She walked into view, calm, still in her black hoodie. Thin, older, hair tied back. It was Anna. She looked down at me like she was just deciding how to rearrange furniture. Her face wasn't angry. It was blank, like she had done this before. She didn't speak, just kicked me in the ribs, in the arm. My leg flinched, but I couldn't move it right. She wasn't in a hurry. Another kick. Then she crouched down next to me and pulled something out of her jacket. A small jar. Inside was a finger. Yellow, gray, split at the knuckle, covered in some kind of gel. She uncovered the lid slowly. It was the second finger. This one wasn't preserved. It was old, starting to rot. She grabbed my jaw. I tried to jerk away, but nothing worked. She pushed the finger into my mouth. Then deeper. I gagged, couldn't breathe. My throat seized up. She leaned close. I could smell the latex gloves. I couldn't breathe. She pushed it until I felt it hit my throat. My body gagged, but nothing came out. My vision blurred. I heard a door open somewhere behind her. Voices, loud, real. Someone dropped something. She froze, looked over her shoulder. I couldn't move my eyes, but I heard the footsteps. 2, maybe 3 people coming in fast. One of them shouted. The other ran toward us. I felt her grip loosen. Anna let it go and bolted, gone before I could blink. One of the employees, Marcus, grabbed my shoulders and yanked me up. I puked hard. The finger shot out and bounced across the tile. Someone screamed when they saw it. Another started dialing 911. I collapsed against the wall. My throat burned. My arms were still shaking. I couldn't stand up. I remember Marcus kneeling next to me, talking, but I couldn't understand a word. Police showed up quick. We gave statements. The cameras had been disconnected. No prints on the taser. No trace of her. They never found her car. They never found her house. It was like she dissolved into the night. The second finger went to forensics. Matched the same guy from before. The guy who gave her the first one. He had lost 2 in the accident and she kept them both. One to frame Wendy's, one to punish me. She vanished. Nobody's seen her since. I don't close anymore. I got moved to daytime. Still, every now and then, I check my back tires before getting in the car. And I never eat the chili.
How many of you grew up watching horror movies? Ever since I was a kid, all I could do was watch these movies. I always watched movies like Dracula or Jason and Freddy slashers. But aside from those well-known figures, there was something that interested me more. Ghosts. As a kid, I was obsessed with capturing ghosts. I would get into trouble and search for places where it was too dangerous for a child. As a teenager, I kept looking, but little by little, I began to lose faith in it. When I was older, I made a YouTube channel to look for ghosts, but to tell you the truth, it's all lies. I started looking for ghosts, but my videos were too boring because no matter where I went, I never found anything. I got to the point where I stopped believing in the paranormal completely, so I put together my own scares for YouTube videos. But one day, the least expected happened. I finally discovered that ghosts are real. Do you know what else I discovered that day? That you can't play with them. I would have preferred to continue not believing or seeing anything in my whole life, because what I saw that day taught me to be terrified of what awaits us after death. That day, I got a small glimpse of pure evil. It all started in an old movie theater that, to my surprise, was still in operation. The place was just a society of promotion where sometimes they showed movies to their members. My interest in this place arose when I found several videos on the internet where the chairs moved by themselves. The tables fell down and the doors slammed violently. Okay, clearly it was all staged, but I didn't care. The video got enough attention for me to go see what was going on. I talked to the people at the local community association where the movie theater was located, and the response of the people was quite surprising. I knew it was all a lie, but the employees and people I was able to interview were pretty convinced that it was all true. I thought maybe the hoax was just a few and everyone believed it was true. In truth, that's the best way to maintain a lie. Make as few people part of it as possible. The place was private, so I couldn't do much more than ask questions. What the locals didn't know was that I planned to go much further. After asking a few questions, I stayed hidden in the place while they closed it. When it got dark, when there was no one else in the place, I took up my video and photo camera and started to explore the place. I knew nothing was going to happen, so I brought some strings and wires to create the scares on my own. Without fear, I started to walk around the cinema area to see where I could put the wires to create fake scares. I approached the movie theater chair and set up the scares to move them by hand as I left. I also left some glass on top of a piece of furniture to break. Everything was perfectly set up, so I started the performance. I filmed myself walking around the place in the dark. I was prepared to cause the first scare. But instead, the scare came to me. A chair had moved by itself. I recognized that chair. That was the chair I had put the string on. But I had not manipulated it, nor had the string pulled my hand. I was confused. Maybe it was an accident. Anyway, I kept filming, since at least I had captured a totally natural and believable reaction. I paused the video and went to check the thread. It was intact. I was about to start filming again in another part of the theater. But before I started, I heard a noise that made my camera fall over. The door near me gave a terrible bang that sent a roar throughout the movie theater. In this place, there was no wind. Everything was closed, and it even felt suffocating. There was no way that bang could have been a coincidence, and I didn't believe the story that there were ghosts in that place. Someone was with me. Someone was probably guarding the place, and when they saw me, they wanted to continue their little joke and scare me too. Ghosts or not, that place was no longer safe. I couldn't film or do anything if there were people watching my every move. I headed for the exit when I realized something. I was forgetting my camera on the floor. I went back to the movie theater, and that's when I realized that none of this was an elaborate prank. There was no way that what was in front of me was fake. I started to make sure that what I was seeing was real. Sitting in the same chair that had moved by itself, sitting in that chair where I had put a thread, someone, or rather something, was sitting. That thing that was there was not human. It was the most horrifying and creepy being I had ever seen in my life. Its body had a humanoid shape, but was deformed and out of a nightmare. What frightened me the most were its eyes and mouth. Its mouth was full of terrifyingly long teeth, while its eyes, compressed backward, were huge and black and stared at me in a terrifying way, as if obsessed with me. I walked slowly backward, not knowing how I could react to what I was seeing. But the door closed again in front of me. When I looked forward again, the monster was gone, but all the chairs had turned around. They were all facing me. I looked on in disbelief. I remember telling myself that all this had to be a joke. None of it could be real. That paranormal thing didn't exist. Suddenly, the chairs began to move slowly in my direction. All the doors except the one behind me opened and closed violently. I fell to the ground in terror, and when I realized, the monster was in front of me. All he did was stare at me with a huge grin and his eyes completely dilated. I was unable to move. I didn't know if he was doing something to me or if it was just my fear, but I was completely frozen. Aware of this, the monster stuck his 2 fingers in my mouth and started to pull them apart with an enormous superhuman force. With each passing second, I could feel my mouth opening wider and wider. The tissues of my lip were being destroyed and my jaw was breaking. At the same time, he put his other hand on my eyes, where he pressed his fingers very slowly into my eyes, squeezing them tighter and tighter. At that point, I couldn't see anything, but I could feel liquid all over my face, and I could tell it was my blood. On the other side, I could feel a laugh, the laugh of the monster that didn't kill me because it didn't want to, because it seemed to enjoy every second of what I was doing. Ah! And suddenly, it's all over. When I woke up, I realized I was in an alley a few blocks away from the movie theater. When I looked at the time, it was 8 p.m. You know what was the strangest thing? The date was the same, just a few hours earlier. I approached the movie theater again, asking for answers, and the people in charge of the place told me that I had been asking questions, but that I had left an hour ago, as if nothing had happened, as if I had never hidden or spent the night there. But you know, it was all real. Since that day, my jaw has hurt a lot and my eyes burn. There are times when I wake up and vomit dirt, and other times I see shadows where there is nothing. Do you know what the worst part of all this is? It's been 2 years now, and all this is still happening to me. I still don't understand why I am still alive. Maybe that thing didn't want to kill me in that place. Maybe it was a warning, or maybe it enjoyed more the fact that I was being consumed over time, slowly, like a decomposing corpse. Whatever it is, I will live whatever is left of my life without looking for the paranormal. Although I know that sooner or later, the paranormal will find me.
I started working at the Cheesecake Factory in Old Town, Pasadena about a year ago. I was a line cook, mostly doing prep and cleaning the grill before closing. It wasn't bad. The pay sucked, but the staff was decent. The only thing that made the place weird was the tunnel under the building. Everyone called it the dungeon. It wasn't part of the restaurant that customers saw. You had to go through a metal door in the back hallway, then down a narrow staircase that smelled like bleach and mold. The managers said it was used for storage decades ago, before the restaurant took over the building. But no one really went down there. The first time I went, it was to grab an old crate of plates. The light flickered nonstop, and the walls were covered in what looked like old grease stains. I could hear something dripping somewhere. The air felt heavy, like the place hadn't been opened in years. I grabbed the crate and got out fast. When I came back up, my coworker Troy asked if I'd heard the kid. I told him no. He said everyone who stayed there late had heard a little girl laughing near the bottom of the stairs. At first, I thought it was bullshit. But after a few nights, I started hearing things too. A metal clang, a faint whisper. Once I swear I heard someone call my name. A few weeks later, after closing, I told my friends about it. We were drinking behind the building and I said there was a tunnel under the restaurant that everyone said was haunted. They laughed at first, but then Greg, who loved all that ghost hunting crap, said we should go down there. I told them it was locked most of the time, but I had a spare key for cleaning shifts. They got excited like idiots. Greg brought his phone to record everything, and his girlfriend, Dana, came too. She said it would make a perfect TikTok video. The last one to join was Luis, another guy from the kitchen. He wasn't into ghosts, but he didn't want to look scared. Before we went in, I hesitated. I remembered how the tunnel sounded at night, how it always felt like someone was waiting at the bottom of the stairs. But I didn't want to look paranoid, so I unlocked the door and turned on the flashlight of my phone. The smell hit us first. It was worse than I remembered, like wet cardboard mixed with rotten meat. Dana gagged. Greg laughed and told her to stop being dramatic. We started walking down. For a few seconds, everything was quiet except our footsteps. Then came the sound, something scraping on the floor somewhere ahead of us. We stopped halfway down the tunnel. The light from the stairway was barely visible behind us. The scraping stopped. Luis whispered that maybe it was a rat, but rats don't make footsteps. We stood still listening. Then, a low voice echoed from the end of the tunnel. Just a single word. Couldn't tell what it said. It sounded like it came from someone with a dry throat. Greg whispered that it must be some speaker system or maybe a homeless guy. Dana wanted to leave. Greg said no, this was the best part. He walked ahead holding his phone high like he was filming a movie. I followed him because the light from his phone was the only one that reached farther in. The deeper we went, the more trash there was. Empty cans, broken boxes, torn blankets. Someone had been living down there. We turned a corner and found a small room. There were 3 mattresses on the floor, all filthy. One of them had bloodstains. On the wall, someone had written with red paint or maybe blood, "No one comes back." Dana freaked out and ran toward the stairs. I yelled at her to wait. Then, something moved behind the mattress. For a moment, I thought it was just a pile of clothes. Then I saw a hand, thin, filthy, trembling. Greg stepped closer and pointed the flashlight at it. A man crawled out slowly. His skin looked gray, his eyes bloodshot. He was barefoot and wearing a torn jacket. He stared at us like an animal trying to decide if we were food. Greg told him we didn't mean any harm. The man tilted his head, then started mumbling something I couldn't understand. Before Greg could say another word, another figure jumped out from behind. This one grabbed Greg's arm and slammed him into the wall. The sound of his skull hitting concrete echoed down the tunnel. I froze. Luis tried to help him, but the second man turned on him and stabbed him with something sharp, maybe a broken piece of metal. I heard Dana screaming somewhere near the stairs. The flashlight rolled across the floor and stopped next to me. I could see Greg's face, his mouth open, eyes blank. I ran. I didn't think, just ran toward the exit. But before I could reach the stairs, a small voice came from behind me. The voice was quiet, but clear. A young girl saying, "Don't leave." I stopped for a second. There, standing near the corner, was a little girl, maybe 8 or 9. Her clothes were filthy, her hair tangled. She looked scared, but her eyes didn't look normal. She wasn't crying. She was staring at me like she knew exactly who I was. I wanted to tell her to come with me, but I couldn't move closer. My body just froze, not from fear, from confusion. Why was she down there? Then I saw someone behind her, the same man who had attacked Greg. He stepped into the light, holding a pipe. The girl didn't even turn around. She just kept staring at me. He said something to her, something about feeding and keeping the noise down. Then he looked at me and smiled. His teeth were cracked and black. I ran up the stairs as fast as I could. I didn't stop, even when I tripped. I didn't look back. When I reached the top, I slammed the door and locked it. I could hear footsteps running below, then a thud, then silence. The police came about 30 minutes later. I told them there were people living under the restaurant, that they had attacked my friends. They didn't believe me until they went down. They came back up, pale as ghosts. They found Greg's and Luis's bodies in that room, along with old cans of food and trash everywhere. But the man and the girl were gone. One officer said that they might have used the service tunnel that connects to another building nearby. They searched for 2 days and found nothing. The door to the tunnel was sealed after that. Management said it was a liability issue. No one mentioned the girl again. I tried to go back to work a week later, but every time I walked past that hallway, I thought I could hear something. Faint metal clanging, footsteps, a soft humming. The police never found the other brother. They said maybe he died down there too, hidden somewhere in the dark. But I knew what I saw. The girl wasn't a ghost. She was alive, and she wasn't trapped. She stayed there because that was her home. I quit a month later. Couldn't stand being in that building anymore. Every time someone mentioned the Cheesecake Factory, I thought of that tunnel, the smell, and the sound of Greg's skull hitting the wall. A few nights ago, I saw a TikTok about the place. Some guy said he worked there now, that he'd heard strange noises coming from under the floor after closing. He even filmed part of the hallway before management told him to stop. In the background, near the bottom of the frame, I could see something move. For a second, the camera caught a small figure standing at the end of the corridor. A little girl in dirty clothes. I had been staring at my brother's Facebook profile for almost an hour without realizing it, scrolling up and down the same post while my chest felt tight and my head refused to slow down. It had been a year since he died, and even after all that time, his page still felt like the only place where he existed in some form that hadn't been erased completely. The room was quiet, too quiet for a city apartment at night, and the light from the laptop was the only thing keeping the space from feeling empty. I wasn't looking for anything specific, and I wasn't expecting surprises because his profile had been frozen for months with no changes, no new activity, and no signs of life. Lauren came out the bathroom while drying her hands, stopped when she saw the screen, and let out a slow breath that sounded tired rather than annoyed. She told me I shouldn't keep doing this to myself, that going back there only made things worse. But I answered that it was the anniversary and that I just needed a few more minutes before closing everything. She looked at me for a moment, then asked if I wanted something to eat and said she would go out to get food anyway. When the door closed behind her, the apartment felt even quieter, and I finally moved the mouse to close the browser. That was when the page refreshed by itself. A new post appeared at the top of the profile without warning, without loading, and without any explanation that made sense. My eyes locked onto the image before my mind had time to react, and my body immediately pulled back from the desk. The photo showed my brother close to the camera, his face soaked in blood, his eyes wide open and fixed straight ahead as if he had been forced to stare. The blood didn't look staged or edited, and the expression on his face wasn't neutral or empty, because it carried fear and anger mixed together in a way that made my stomach twist. I checked the name, the username, the friends list, and every detail that would confirm it wasn't real, but everything matched his account exactly. Then I noticed the small green dot next to his name that said active now, and my hands started shaking so badly that I had to place them on my legs. Before I could process that, a message notification appeared on the screen. I didn't open it right away because part of me hoped it would disappear if I waited long enough. When it didn't, I clicked. "Brother, please help me, save me." My chair slid back as I stood up too fast, my heart beating hard enough to hurt. I walked to the bathroom, splashed water on my face, and told myself that grief could do this, that my head was breaking under pressure. When I went back to the room, the laptop was still on. The profile picture hadn't changed. The image was closer now, and my brother's face filled most of the frame with more blood running down his skin and into his clothes. His eyes looked strained as if he had been staring without blinking for a long time, and the longer I looked, the harder it became to breathe normally. Nothing happened for several seconds, and that waiting felt worse than action because my body stayed tense and ready to react while my mind raced through possibilities. Another message arrived slowly, letter by letter. "It hurts. You left me there." I reached for the power cord and pulled it from the wall with shaking hands, watching the screen go black while my heart continued racing. I stood there holding the cable, listening to the silence, trying to calm down. The laptop turned on by itself. The startup sound felt painfully loud, and the screen lit up without asking for anything, already showing Facebook open on my brother's profile. His face was closer again, distorted and stretched, and a low sound came from the speakers that made my throat tighten. Before anything else happened, I froze in place, watched Image shift as if he was moving forward, frame by frame without stopping. His mouth opened, his eyes focused directly on me, and the ground grew louder. I ran to the door and tried to open it, pulling the handle hard while my breath came out uneven and fast. The door didn't move, and the sound behind me became wet and heavy, like something dragging itself forward. When I turned around, my brother's head was already pushing out of the screen, bending the monitor outward as if it were soft. Blood smeared along the edge as his shoulders followed, and his arms reached forward with movements that looked wrong and uncontrolled. Before he fully came out, there was a moment where he stayed half inside the screen, staring at me with a look that mixed anger and pain so strongly that my legs felt weak. Then his body dropped to the floor, and he stood up far too quickly. He crossed the room in seconds and grabbed my arms with a grip that hurt immediately, his fingers digging into my skin while blood soaked through his clothes and onto the carpet. His face was close to mine, and his voice came out loud and raw. "This was your fault. You killed me." He screamed each word directly into my face while shaking me, his grip tightening every time I tried to pull away. I could barely keep my balance, and my arms felt useless under his strength. That's when I heard Lauren yelling from outside the apartment, asking why the door was locked and what was wrong. My brother's expression changed, his grip loosened, and his body jerked as if something was pulling him away. I twisted the handle again, and this time, the door opened. I stumbled forward and grabbed Lauren, holding onto her while my body shook uncontrollably and my breathing refused to slow down. She asked what happened, what I saw, and why my arms were red, but I couldn't explain anything in a way that sounded sane. When I looked back into the apartment, the room was empty, the laptop was off, and there was no sign of blood or damage anywhere. Lauren stayed close to me that night, watching me carefully while I barely slept. The days that followed were heavy and tense, filled with constant fear that something would happen again. Every sound made me flinch, and every notification made my chest tighten. Before the next breakdown, there was no relief, only waiting and exhaustion. I started therapy because I couldn't keep pretending everything was normal. The therapist asked me about my brother, about the accident, about the guilt I tried to avoid talking about. Saying it out loud felt worse than any image or message. I told her I was driving that night, that I was distracted, and that I didn't handle the turn correctly. I admitted that my brother wasn't wearing a seatbelt and that I never insisted, even though I knew better. I explained that the impact threw him forward, and there was nothing anyone could do after that. My chest felt tight as I spoke, and my hands shook the entire time. The therapist listened without interrupting and explained that guilt doesn't disappear when it's ignored because it looks for ways to come back stronger. After that session, the messages stopped. I no longer opened my brother's Facebook profile, and I removed everything connected to it from my phone and computer. I think about my brother every day, and that hasn't changed, but the fear has settled into something heavier and quieter. I still don't know what happened that night. I refuse to believe it was all in my head. When he touched me, I realized that it was real. No one will understand me, but what came out of that screen was a message from the dead. The first thing you need to understand is that nothing about me suggested I was the kind of man this would happen to, and that belief is exactly what made everything worse. I worked in an office, a regular job. I didn't think danger came from places like my desk, my apartment, or a casual conversation near the printer. Marla joined the company in early February, a few days before Valentine's Day. She wasn't loud, didn't dress to stand out, and didn't try to force herself into conversations. When she spoke, she did it softly, carefully, like she was always afraid of saying the wrong thing. That made people lower their voices around her, including me. She started talking to me after a few days, usually about work at first,
then about small personal things like food she liked or shows she watched. I thought she was very pretty, and I knew she was single. Before asking her out, I told myself not to overthink it, not to assign meaning where there wasn't any, and not to expect anything more than a simple drink after work. Valentine's Day made it feel like a good excuse and actually a romantic idea. When I invited her, she smiled in a way that looked relieved, and she agreed immediately. The bar was close to my apartment, quiet enough to talk without raising our voices. We stayed longer than planned, and the conversation never stalled, which made me relax more than I should have. She laughed easily, asked questions that felt personal without being invasive, and kept telling me how comfortable she felt around me. When the bar closed, I offered her the couch without much thought, mostly because it felt awkward to send her home late. She accepted quickly as if she had already expected the offer. That should have stood out to me, but at the time, it just felt like chemistry. In the morning, I woke up to the sound of movement in my kitchen, which immediately put me on edge because I live alone and I am not used to hearing anyone else in my space. Marlo was already dressed, cooking breakfast, moving confidently through my apartment like she knew where everything was. I felt surprised and slightly uncomfortable, but I didn't say anything because I didn't want to seem ungrateful or rude. She left later that day, kissed my cheek casually, and said she would text me. I watched her walk away and told myself it had just been a good date, nothing more. That weekend I went out with friends like I used to, but I kept thinking about how fast everything had happened, even though I didn't fully admit it to myself. I tried to convince myself that I was just nervous because it had been a while since I dated anyone seriously. When I got home late that night and unlocked my door, I immediately knew something was wrong because the lights were on and the TV was playing, even though I was certain I had turned everything off before leaving. My body reacted before my mind did, and I froze in the doorway listening. Marlo was sitting on my couch wearing comfortable clothes, watching television like it was the most natural thing in the world. When I asked how she got inside, my voice came out tighter than I expected, and she responded calmly saying she had made a copy of my key earlier, asking if that was okay like it was a small favor. I felt very confused and somewhat nervous. I told her that was too much, that we were moving too fast and that she should have asked me first. She nodded, apologized softly, and then asked what I wanted for dinner, completely ignoring the fact that I was visibly shaken. She stayed the entire weekend. Every time I tried to bring up the conversation again, she redirected it, smiled, or acted hurt enough to make me back off. I started feeling trapped inside my own apartment, sleeping lightly, locking my bedroom door at night, and listening for movement. By Monday, I was exhausted, anxious, and desperate for distance, believing that work would create a barrier she couldn't cross. That illusion shattered the moment I saw her at the office, standing confidently among coworkers, laughing and touching people's arms while telling stories. When I approached the group, the mood shifted immediately, and several coworkers congratulated me, mentioning how happy they were for us. My confusion turned into dread when Marla casually said we were a couple and that we were planning a future together. She spoke about marriage like it was a scheduled task, saying she was just waiting for me to propose and that she trusted I would do it soon. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears, and my hands started shaking in a way I couldn't control. I asked her to talk after work, barely holding myself together for the rest of the day. Outside, I finally said everything I had been holding back, explaining that we were not together, that I never agreed to any of this, and that she needed to return the key and to leave me alone. Her reaction was immediate and intense. Her face hardened, her breathing became shallow, and her voice dropped when she told me I was humiliating her. After that, she stopped speaking to me entirely, and the silence felt heavier rather than relieving. Weeks passed with no interaction, and I slowly began to relax, thinking the situation had resolved itself. But the worst was yet to come. It all started on one of our coworkers' birthdays. I attended, confident that Marla wouldn't be there. She had been very isolated in recent weeks and didn't even have a relationship with the birthday guy. We heard a scream echo through the room, sharp enough to silence everyone. Marla stood outside the bathroom, shaking, crying, barely able to speak, saying one of our coworkers had attacked her and that she defended herself. Inside, the man lay unconscious on the floor. The room filled with panic, shouting, and fear, and people immediately surrounded her, offering comfort and support. I felt guilt rise in my chest, thinking that maybe my rejection had pushed her into something traumatic. That thought ate at me, and I started checking on her, walking her home and staying close, believing I was helping someone fragile. Without asking, she moved back into my apartment. This time, she didn't even pretend it was temporary. She was cheerful, energetic, and disturbingly unaffected by what had happened. The man was hospitalized, unconscious, and she talked about it like it was already behind her. The disconnect terrified me. I slept less, avoided being alone with her when possible, and started feeling watched even when she wasn't in the room. One day, 2 police officers knocked on my door. They were asking for Marla by name. They explained everything carefully, telling me that the hospitalized man had woken up, spoken to them, and denied every accusation. The security footage confirmed his story, showing Marla following him, drugging his drink, and attacking him. As they spoke, Marla appeared behind me, calm and smiling as if this was just another inconvenience. When they arrested her, she didn't struggle. She looked at me and said, "Love required commitment, and commitment required action." I felt sick, dizzy, and ashamed, realizing how close I had come to being the next person she framed or harmed. Valentine's Day still arrives every year, but now it feels like a warning rather than a celebration. I learned that danger doesn't always come loudly or violently at first. Sometimes it comes quietly, smiling, and already holding a copy of your key. The first time I realized something was wrong, I was already staring at the screen and couldn't look away. That moment didn't feel exciting or mysterious. It felt heavy, like my body understood something my head refused to accept. I had always been curious about things people warned others not to touch. Not because I felt special, but because I hated not knowing. If something existed, I needed proof. That habit followed me into adulthood, especially during nights when I stayed awake watching YouTube videos about obscure parts of the internet. I didn't talk about it with my friends or family. Those videos became something private, something I watched with headphones on, replaying details and comments. The deep web wasn't presented as fantasy there, but as structure, a system that rewarded patience and obsession. What caught my attention the most was red rooms, not because of the violence, but because nobody could prove they were real. I didn't want horror. I wanted confirmation. I started slowly using basic tools that anyone could find with enough searching. Most nights ended the same way, with blank pages and dead links that led nowhere. That didn't frustrate me because it matched what the videos explained. Real things were hidden behind repetition and time. I found black markets, forums, and video directories that felt wrong but unimpressive. Everything looked transactional and cold. I never interacted with anyone. I stayed invisible, just observing, telling myself that was enough. Red rooms never appeared. Weeks passed without a trace, and part of me started thinking they were just another myth recycled for views. Still, I kept searching, night after night, following the same routine. Then one night, a red room appeared at the top of an empty page. It didn't load or animate. Before clicking anything, I sat back and tried to calm my breathing because my body reacted faster than my thoughts. My heart wasn't racing, but there was pressure in my chest that didn't fade. I checked the room, the door, the window, even though it made no sense. The red room asked a simple question about entering. No explanation followed, and that made it worse. I clicked yes, expecting something dramatic, but the same question appeared again, identical in every way. I hesitated, then clicked yes once more. The repetition started to bother me, not because it felt fake, but because it felt deliberate. Every time I answered, the page refreshed instantly, as if someone was waiting for that response. I told myself I could stop any time, but I didn't. When the room finally disappeared, nothing replaced it. No loading screen, no confirmation. I waited, staring at the screen until my eyes hurt, then shut the laptop and went to bed without sleeping.
The next evening when someone knocked on my door, I didn't know if it was influenced by my experience yesterday, but I was a little worried. I stayed quiet for several seconds, standing close enough to hear movement outside. A voice said my name and mentioned a delivery. It sounded normal, but my hands tightened around the door handle anyway. The moment I opened the door, everything collapsed into chaos. Hands grabbed my arms with force that didn't allow resistance. Another hand covered my mouth hard enough to hurt my jaw. I tried to scream, but no sound escaped. They moved fast and efficiently, like they had done this before. A hood went over my head and something solid pressed against my face, cutting off air. My wrists were pulled behind my back and secured tightly, making my shoulders burn. I was dragged into a vehicle and pushed down onto the seat. Someone kept pressure on my head while the car started moving. No one spoke, and the silence made it worse than threats ever could. I lost track of time as the car sped through turns. Breathing became harder, slower, until everything faded out. When I woke up, the first thing I noticed was the position of my body, because I couldn't move. My wrists were tied to a chair, my ankles secured, my back forced straight. Panic didn't explode immediately. It built slowly as I tested every restraint and failed. Bright lights blinded me, aimed directly at my face. I tried to look away, but my head was pulled back roughly by someone standing behind me. My vision adjusted enough to see cameras placed around the room, all pointed at me. A screen turned on in front of me, filling with usernames and numbers that kept changing. I understood what it was before my mind could deny it. This wasn't a video archive. It was live. Men moved in and out of my view, faces covered, gestures calm and methodical. One of them adjusted a camera. Another checked the screen, nodding slowly. Requests appeared on the screen, and they followed them carefully, step by step, making sure everything was visible. They waited after each action, watching reactions, adjusting angles, continuing without hesitation. My body reacted before my voice did. I cried, begged, tried to explain anything that could make this stop. Nothing changed. This wasn't punishment or revenge. It was scheduled. I couldn't believe what I was experiencing. My curiosity about red rooms led me to this place as the protagonist. I just wanted to observe, but now I am the object. They began using devices meant to control pain precisely, not to end anything quickly. One of them placed clamps on my arms and legs, tightening them until my muscles locked and my hands lost strength. Another adjusted the chair again so my feet barely touched the floor, forcing my weight onto my shoulders and lower back. Every time my body tried to shift or resist, they corrected it immediately, tightening something else, pushing me back into position so the cameras never lost sight of my face. And after that, they focused on keeping me responsive. They poured cold water over my head without warning, then left me sitting there shaking while the light stayed fixed on my eyes. When my breathing slowed, one of them struck my leg hard enough to make my body jerk, not once, but repeatedly, waiting between each hit to make sure I stayed awake. The last thing I remember clearly was my vision narrowing as the lights stayed fixed on me. When consciousness returned, it came in fragments. My body felt heavy and unresponsive, and my thoughts refused to connect properly. The environment was different, quieter, but I couldn't open my eyes immediately. A voice called my name, repeating it slowly until it broke through the fog in my head. When I finally managed to focus, I saw white walls and medical equipment around me. My throat hurt when I tried to speak, and my hands were free but weak. Someone pressed a button and left the room without explaining anything. I stayed there staring at the ceiling, trying to piece together what was real and what wasn't, but my thoughts kept circling back to the cameras. My mother was sitting next to the bed when I fully woke up. She looked exhausted, like someone who hadn't slept properly in days. When she saw my eyes open, she held my hand tightly and didn't say anything at first. I told her everything in a rush, afraid that if I stopped talking, the memories would slip away. I described the website, the red room, the men, the room, the broadcast. I needed her to believe me. She listened calmly, then told me this wasn't the first time I had told that story. According to her, I had never lived alone, never owned a computer, and had no access to the internet. She said I had been hospitalized before after obsessing over crime cases, always convinced I had been taken somewhere. The doctors called it a recurring episode. I stopped arguing and looked away. I listened to my mother, but I didn't accept what she was saying. After she left the room, I tested my hands, my wrists, my arms, slowly checking everything. I no longer had any wounds, but I am sure that they did not all disappear. I tried to remember everything that happened in the Red Room, although everything is in fragments. They erased my memory. I'm sure they'll come for me again. I was just another man scrolling through Tinder at night, sitting alone in my apartment killing time because sleep never came easily anymore. My life was simple and predictable. I worked, came home, and filled the silence with my phone. Tinder wasn't hope or romance for me. It was distraction, something that made the hours pass faster when the walls felt too close. That's when I matched with Marla. Her profile stood out without trying too hard. Natural photos, no forced poses, and always the same small dog in her arms. She looked warm, relaxed, and confident in a way that felt real instead of staged. She messaged first, and the conversation flowed without effort. She laughed easily, asked real questions, and complimented me in a way that didn't feel fake. I kept waiting for the moment where it would turn awkward or cold, but it never did. By the end of the night, she suggested meeting in person. We agreed to meet up at a cafe close to her place. Nothing special, just a simple date. I agreed immediately, telling myself that sometimes things just work out. I arrived early to the cafe and spent several minutes pretending to check my phone while watching the door. When Marla walked in, there was no confusion or disappointment. She looked exactly like her photos, but more live, more present, with a smile that felt directed only at me. She spoke with energy, leaned toward me while I talked, and paid attention in a way that made me feel seen. She touched my arm lightly once, just enough to make my chest tighten. I didn't understand why someone like her was sitting across from me, but I didn't question it. After one drink, she suggested leaving the cafe. She said her place was nearby and quieter. There was no hesitation in her voice, no playful pause. I nodded, trying to act calm while my heart beat too fast. Her apartment was clean and oddly empty, with no photos and no personal details. The music played softly while she poured drinks. We sat close on the couch, and when she kissed me, I didn't stop her. Before anything truly happened, I felt something slip. My focus faded, my reactions slowed, and my body stopped responding the way it should have. I tried to speak, but the words wouldn't form properly. The fear didn't hit immediately. At first, it was confusion mixed with embarrassment, like my body was failing me at the worst possible moment. My head felt heavy, my arms weak, and my vision blurred in and out as I struggled to stay upright. I tried to push myself off the couch, but my legs didn't cooperate. My mouth opened, yet the sound that came out was barely a whisper. Marla watched me with patience, her face calm, her posture relaxed, as if this was unfolding exactly as planned. When I woke up, my wrists and ankles were tied tightly to a bed frame. The cords cut into my skin when I moved, and the room around me was unfamiliar and windowless. Panic rose fast, filling my chest until breathing became difficult. I pulled against the restraints, my muscles shaking from effort and fear, while my thoughts raced without direction. I tried to scream again, but my throat felt raw and dry, producing only broken sounds. The door opened slowly, and Marla stepped inside. A man followed her, his head covered with a dark cloth. The door closed behind them with a final sound that made my stomach drop. Before they touched me, they waited. That waiting felt deliberate, like they wanted me fully awake and aware of what was coming. My breathing grew louder, uneven, and impossible to control as my eyes moved between them. The man approached first and grabbed my arm with firm pressure. He pressed a heavy object against my skin and increased the force slowly. Pain spread deep through my arm, sharp enough to force a scream out of me as my body jerked against the restraints. Marla watched closely, her eyes focused, her mouth relaxed. She didn't flinch when I begged or when my voice broke. She nodded once, and the man moved to my legs, repeating the same action until my muscles cramped violently. I cried openly, my face wet, my voice cracking as I asked why this was happening. I told them they had the wrong person, that I didn't know them, that I would do anything to make it stop. Marla laughed softly, not out of humor, but out of satisfaction. She stepped closer and looked directly into my face. You really don't remember? I swear I don't know you. You remember what you chose to forget. She spoke about the dog, the small white dog, the night I hit it with my car and drove away without stopping. The memory came back with brutal clarity, tightening my chest until it hurt to breathe. I didn't interrupt her. I couldn't. My body shook uncontrollably, not just from pain, but from understanding exactly why I was there. She explained how she found me using cameras, license plates, and weeks of watching my routine. She talked about patience, about planning, and about knowing that someone like me would eventually look for connection online. I knew you would swipe. You always do. The man returned to the bed and twisted my fingers one by one, slow enough to make each movement count. The pain forced screams out of me that I couldn't control, my body arching uselessly against the restraints. I begged again, apologizing repeatedly, promising anything I could think of. My words overlapped and tangled, sounding desperate and weak even to my own ears. Marla leaned close enough that I could feel her breathe. You didn't stop. You didn't look back. They left me there afterward, alone, shaking and exhausted, my body aching everywhere they had touched. When Marla returned, she cut the ropes without ceremony. She didn't apologize or threaten me. She simply told me to get dressed and leave. I failed trying to stand, my legs barely holding me upright. She watched without helping as I struggled toward the door. The hallway outside was empty, cold, and smelled old, like no one truly lived there. Days later, I realized the apartment wasn't hers. The building was abandoned. The Tinder profile disappeared. The phone number stopped working. There was nothing to trace. I thought about reporting everything, but every time I tried to speak, the image of that dog came back, lying broken on the street while I drove away. I deleted Tinder and stopped looking for company online. I avoid driving at night whenever possible, and sudden sounds still make my chest tighten. I don't think of Marla every day, but I never forget her. I don't believe she wanted to kill me. She wanted me to carry it with me, and I deserved it.
My friend Hannah and I decided to celebrate a different kind of Valentine's Day, honoring our friendship without thinking about our broken hearts. It was just a simple girls' night out. But our lives changed completely. Hannah and I have known each other since we were little girls. She was the perfect date. I packed a backpack with cheap wine, snacks, and pajamas and went to Hannah's house because neither of us wanted to be alone that night. We were both recently separated, but that wasn't going to stop us from enjoying the day. The plan was simple. Stay inside, watch movies, and let the night pass without making it a big deal. Couples had already disappeared into their plans, and the street felt empty earlier than usual. We put on a movie, opened the wine, and tried to relax. Half an hour later, we realized we forgot most of the snacks. We laughed it off, grabbed our jackets, and went out, telling ourselves it would only take a few minutes. The walk back from the store should have been forgettable, but something about it stuck with me later. The street was almost silent, until we heard footsteps behind us, close enough to notice, slow enough to make us turn around. It was Ethan, Hannah's neighbor. I recognized him immediately because he always looked like someone trying not to be seen. He smiled too wide when he saw us and asked how we were doing, then asked if we were planning to spend the night alone. The question came out casual, but his eyes stayed fixed on Hannah. He started talking without stopping, explaining that his wife had left him for another man, saying it like a joke, even though his hands kept shaking. He said nights like Valentine's Day made everything worse and that people never understood what betrayal really felt like. Hannah nodded politely and tried to unlock the door while he talked. We told him we were sorry and said we were tired. He finally stepped back, waved, and walked toward his house. We locked the door behind us and stood there for a second longer than necessary. Hannah said he was strange, then shrugged it off, and we went back to the living room. Nothing else happened for a while. Then, a sound came from outside late at night, after the second movie had already started and the wine was almost gone. It wasn't loud, but it was sharp enough to pull my attention away from the screen. Hannah muted the TV, and we both listened without speaking, trying to decide if it was worth reacting. There was a long pause where the house felt exposed, like every wall was thinner than it should have been. I told myself it was probably nothing and stood up, because neither of us wanted to admit we were scared already. I walked to the door and looked through the peephole, seeing only darkness and the empty porch. When I opened the door, Ethan rushed forward so fast I didn't even have time to react. He slammed into the door with his shoulder, forcing his way inside and knocking me backward. The door closed behind him, and the lock clicked before I could even think about running. He had a gun in his hand, and his face looked completely different from earlier. He started yelling immediately, demanding to know where Hannah's ex was, shouting his name over and over. Hannah kept saying he doesn't live there anymore, her voice shaking as she tried to back away. Ethan stepped closer, waving the gun and screaming that he knew the truth, that everyone was lying to him. He accused Hannah's ex of stealing his wife and ruining his life, and he would not listen when she said he wasn't there. He pointed the gun at us and told us to move, and we obeyed because there was nothing else we could do. He forced us down the hallway and into the bedroom, slamming the door shut behind us. He kept pacing while asking the same questions again and again. Hannah lied and said her ex was coming back soon, hoping it would calm him or buy time, but it only made him angrier. Before touching us, he stood there staring, like he was deciding something. That silence was worse than the shouting, because neither of us knew what would happen next. Then he told us to sit on the bed and not look at him. He ordered us to take off our clothes until we were in our underwear, and we did it slowly, shaking so badly it was hard to move. He tied our hands with something thin and rough that burned into our skin, then took out his phone and started filming, laughing and telling us to say his name. He hit Hannah first, then turned to me, moving with intention instead of panic. Every strike felt planned, like he wanted us to remember it. He kept yelling that nobody disrespected him, and that this was what happened to people who took things from him. When he pulled out the lighter, Hannah started crying louder, begging him to stop. He didn't listen. He burned us in short bursts, watching our reactions and laughing like it entertained him. There was a moment when Hannah managed to free one hand, and I saw hope flash across her face before fear took over. She grabbed a heavy vase from the dresser and swung it at him, hitting his shoulder instead of his head. Ethan reacted instantly, grabbing her hair and throwing her to the floor. The gun slid away, but he didn't even look at it. He picked up a thick wooden rod from the corner of the room and raised it without hesitation. He hit her again and again, his face empty, his movements slow and deliberate. Hannah screamed at first, then stopped responding, and he kept going even after her body went still. I covered my face and pressed myself against the wall, unable to move, unable to look away from the sound. When he finally stopped, he stood there, breathing hard, then turned to me without emotion. He lit a blanket on fire and threw it onto the floor, watching the flames grow. He locked the door from the outside and walked away, leaving us inside as the fire spread. Smoke filled the room quickly, burning my throat and eyes. My wrists hurt so badly I could barely think, but panic forced me to move. I crawled across the floor to Hannah, touching her face, and realizing she was gone. I worked the ties against the broken bed frame until they snapped, my hands shaking so badly I could barely control them. The flames climbed the walls and the heat pressed in from every direction. I smashed the window with a wooden rod, cutting myself as I climbed out. I ran barefoot into the street, screaming for help, until lights turned on and doors opened. Police and fire trucks arrived in minutes, and Ethan was arrested that same night. He was sentenced to life in prison. Hannah died in that room. The house burned down completely. Valentine's Day passed like it never existed. The first thing you need to understand is that I wasn't distracted, drunk, or half asleep that night, because I know people like to assume that when something bad happens. I was fully awake, tired from work, yes, but aware of when I was and what time it was. It was late, close to 11, and I was taking the subway home like I'd done hundreds of times before. I work downtown, long hours, nothing exciting, and the subway is part of my routine, whether I like it or not. The line I take has a reputation, and everyone in New York knows it. People talk about it being strange, about seeing things that don't quite fit. But after a while, you stop listening. You normalize behavior that shouldn't feel normal. That night I got on the train, found a seat and leaned back, already thinking about getting home and taking off my shoes. The car was half full, quiet in that uncomfortable way where everyone avoids looking at each other too much. Nothing stood out at first, and that is what makes what happened harder to explain. I sat there for maybe a minute before I felt that uncomfortable pressure in my chest that tells you someone is watching you. Not casually, not by accident, but with intention. Across from me sat an older woman wearing a long dark coat, even though it wasn't that cold. Her posture was stiff and unnatural, like she was holding herself in place. She was staring straight at me. I mean directly at my face, without blinking or shifting her eyes, even once. Next to her sat a man, around my age, maybe a little older, slouched forward with his hands clasped between his knees. He never looked up, not when the train moved, not when people got on or off. He looked tense, like his body was working hard to stay still. I tried to tell myself I was overreacting, because people stare on the subway and sometimes they're just weird. Still, every time I looked back at the woman, her eyes were exactly where I left them. Her mouth stayed slightly open, and her breathing, if she was breathing, was impossible to notice. I stood up and moved closer to the door, pretending I was getting ready for my stop, even though it was still several stations away. My heart was already beating too fast, and I hated that I could feel it in my throat. At the next stop, a man got on and stood near the pole in front of me, and the moment his eyes locked onto mine, I knew something was very wrong. Before anything physical happened, there was a long stretch of silence that made my skin crawl. The doors closed, the train started moving again, and the standing man didn't look away, even once. His expression was serious, focused, like he was counting something in his head. I glanced back at the woman and she leaned forward just slightly, enough to confirm she was still watching me. My hands tightened around my bag and I scanned the car looking for anyone paying attention, but everyone seemed trapped in their own world. The standing man stepped closer, close enough that I could smell his cologne, and my body reacted before my brain could catch up. I shifted sideways, trying to put distance between us, but the train slowed, and that is when he grabbed me. His grip was strong and sudden, fingers digging into my arm through my coat. I shouted and tried to twist free, my bag slipping off my shoulders as the doors opened. People stared, but no one moved. Dragged me out onto the platform, and I managed to wrench my arm free by slamming my elbow backward. I didn't wait to see his reaction. I ran. Shoes slipped slightly on the concrete as the train door slammed shut behind me. I took the stairs, stopping. my lungs burning, my legs shaking as I burst out onto the street. The night air felt cold and sharp, and the city suddenly felt empty, like I had stepped into the wrong version of it. I ran without direction, turning corners at random, driven by pure panic and the sound of footsteps that I could not always hear, but felt were there. My thoughts were scattered, jumping from escape routes to worst outcomes, and I could barely keep track of where I was. I turned into a narrow passage between two buildings without thinking, only realizing my mistake when the space closed in, and there was no way forward. I stopped, breath ragged, and turned around just as the man from the subway stepped into the entrance. He raised his hands slowly, his face tense but not angry, and spoke in a low, controlled voice. "Calm down. I'm not going to hurt you." I pressed myself against the wall, my legs weak, my voice shaking as I told him to stay back. I begged him to leave me alone, to let me go, because I didn't understand what was happening. "I pulled you out because you were in danger. That woman on the train was dead." His words didn't make sense at first, and I told him that, my voice breaking as fear turned into confusion. He took a careful step closer and explained that he worked at a morgue and knew what dead skin looked like, knew when a body was being held up instead of standing on its own. "The man next to her was holding her. He was waiting for the right stop, and you caught his attention." I stood there, frozen, just overwhelmed and desperate to survive. I asked him why he didn't warn me instead of dragging me, and he said there was no time, that people freeze when they are warned. I wanted to believe him, because believing him meant I wasn't alone anymore. I thanked him, my hands still shaking, and told him I needed to get somewhere safe. He stepped aside and motioned toward the street. "Go now. Do not stop." I walked past him slowly, every muscle tight, and when I stepped back onto the sidewalk, I saw the man from the subway standing under a streetlight, smiling directly at me. That is when I ran again. The man chased me, his footsteps fast and steady behind mine, and panic pushed my body beyond what I thought it could handle. I crossed streets without looking, barely avoided cars, and felt my legs screaming in protest as I forced them to keep moving. I ducked into an apartment lobby and slammed the door shut, pressing my weight against the glass as he hit it hard with his shoulder. For a moment, I thought it would break, but then he stopped. Behind him stood the man who claimed he saved me, watching quietly, and the look they exchanged told me everything I needed to know. I ran deeper into the building, found another exit, and didn't stop until I reached a crowded avenue filled with noise and people. I stayed there until my body finally gave out, shaking uncontrollably among strangers. Nothing was reported the next day, which somehow made everything worse. I changed my routines, my routes, and my habits, but I never regained the sense of safety I had before. That night taught me that sometimes the danger is not loud or obvious, and sometimes the people who claim to save you are only waiting for a better moment.
I didn't open Facebook looking for trouble. I opened it because I needed work. I was sitting at my desk early in the morning, half awake, scrolling through job groups, reading posts that all sounded the same, when I saw a group that made no sense in that context. It wasn't related to work, freelancing, or hiring. It had a ridiculous profile picture of a grown man wearing party glasses and a cheap hat, smiling in a way that felt forced even through a small image. The group name said, "Fans of John Smith." No description, no rules, nothing else. What stopped me wasn't the name, because it was generic, but the number of members. More than 700 people. That didn't match the joke at all. I stared at it longer than I should have, feeling slightly uncomfortable but also curious in a silly, harmless way. I wanted to understand why so many people were part of something that looked pointless, I clicked the group, expecting to laugh and close it immediately. The page took longer than usual to load, which made me impatient at first. But when it finally appeared, my attention locked in place. Every single member had the same face as their profile picture. It was the same man from the group photo, wearing the same glasses and hat, staring directly at the camera. Some profiles had small differences: a scarf, different glasses, a hat tilted slightly to one side, but the expression never changed. It wasn't edited badly or filtered. It looked real, which made the repetition disturbing instead of funny. The group feed was worse. There were no text posts, no jokes, no explanations. Just photos of that man, taken in different places and angles. Each post had dozens of comments, sometimes more than 100, and every comment came from the same face again. These were not empty or inactive profiles. They posted daily, commented on each other, and interacted constantly. I clicked several profiles, trying to find a mistake, a crack, something that explained the pattern. They had friends, tagged photos, likes, and normal activity mixed with more images of that man. Different names, different locations, same face. It felt coordinated in a way I couldn't explain. I closed the group after a few minutes, telling myself it was some kind of performance or online joke taken too far. I went back to job searching, forcing my focus elsewhere, convinced that once the tab was closed, the whole thing would stop existing for me. A few hours later, my phone buzzed with a Facebook notification, and my body reacted before my brain did. My chest tightened and my hand hesitated before unlocking the screen, because part of me already knew what I was going to see. It was a friend request from a profile with that same face, same glasses, same hat, different name. I checked the profile carefully, scrolling slowly, trying to calm myself by analyzing details, but everything looked real and active. I hadn't joined the group, commented, or reacted to anything, so I couldn't understand how they found me. I didn't accept or decline the request. I closed the app and placed the phone face down on the table, telling myself that ignoring it was the smartest option. 10 minutes later, another notification appeared. Another request. Same face, different name again. Before the third notification arrived, I felt a knot forming in my stomach. I opened Facebook again, trying to stay calm, and saw that the first profile had sent me a message. It wasn't text. It was an image. The man's face filled the screen, closer than before, staring straight ahead without any background. I didn't respond. I closed the app, but the notifications didn't stop. Over the next hour, my phone filled with requests, one after another, until there were more than 100 waiting. Blocking them barely helped, because new ones kept appearing faster than I could react. Before doing anything else, I logged out of my account, uninstalled the app, and shut my phone down completely. My hands were shaking and my breathing was uneven, because this no longer felt like an online prank. It felt organized, deliberate, and directed at me. 3 days passed without any new notifications, which helped me convince myself that stepping away had worked. I needed food and I needed to feel normal again, so I left my phone at home and went to the grocery store, telling myself that real life had nothing to do with what happened online. I walked through the aisles slowly, focusing on small decisions like choosing brands and checking prices, trying to ground myself in ordinary actions. That sense of control disappeared the moment I noticed someone standing still at the end of the aisle. It was him. Same man, same glasses, same hat. He wasn't holding a basket or a cart, and he wasn't pretending to shop. He was, just standing there, watching me without blinking, his expression flat and empty. My heart started racing and my legs felt weak, but I forced myself to turn away and move faster toward the exit because panic would only make things worse. I dropped my basket by accident, heard it hit the floor, and didn't stop to pick it up. I ran past people and pushed through the automatic doors. Outside, I looked back once and saw him still inside the store, standing in the same place, as if he hadn't moved at all. I didn't wait to see more. I went straight home, checking every reflection along the way, feeling exposed and watched. When my building came into view, my chest tightened again, because he was already there. He stood across the street, facing the entrance, staring directly at me without moving. I fumbled with my keys, got inside, and locked the door behind me as fast as I could. From my window, I looked down and saw that he wasn't alone anymore. There were at least 10 men standing on the sidewalk, all identical, all facing my building, all completely silent. None of them looked around or spoke to each other. They just waited. Before anything else happened, I grabbed my phone and called the police, struggling to explain what I was seeing without sounding insane. When they arrived, the street was empty. All men vanished. Nothing that supported my story. That night, I barely slept. When I woke up in the middle of the night, pressure on my arms held me down. 5 men stood around my bed, moving quickly and confidently, tying my wrists and ankles while another pressed a hand over my mouth. They dressed me like them, placed the hat on my head, adjusted the glasses on my face, and took photos with bright flashes that burned my eyes. "You belong now. You are one of us." Then they left. Morning came, but nothing felt normal again. My phone, laptop, and documents were gone, and every attempt to access my accounts failed. It was as if my digital presence had been erased completely, leaving behind a version of me I didn't recognize. I never saw those men again, but the damage was done. I moved months later, changed numbers, and avoided social media as much as possible, knowing that whatever they wanted from me had already been taken. Last week, my younger brother laughed while showing me his phone during dinner. He found a weird Facebook group. All the members looked the same, like a funny guy with glasses. I didn't ask to see it. I didn't need to.
If you are watching this on Valentine's Day, stop for a second, because this story starts in a normal place and ends in a way that still keeps me awake at night. That day I was walking with my dog in the same park near my apartment like every morning. While my dog pulled the leash near the fountain, I heard my name spoken clearly behind me, and the sound made my shoulders tense before I even turned around. When I faced the voice, I saw a woman standing there with a calm smile that did not move when she noticed my reaction. It took me several seconds to recognize her, because my brain resisted the idea before accepting it. Her name was Lena, and we had not seen each other since we were teenagers, back when promises were easy and consequences felt unreal. We started talking in an awkward way, filling the silence with safe questions that avoided anything important, and I noticed quickly that she answered too fast, like she had rehearsed every possible version of this conversation. I also noticed that she watched me closely while answering, like she was checking if I matched an image she had kept for years. She told me she knew I lived nearby and that she had seen me walking my dog before, which made me uncomfortable even though I tried not to show it. When I asked how long she had been back in town, she said she returned recently and waited for the right moment to see me, and the way she said it made my chest tighten even though her tone stayed soft. "I knew I would run into you eventually. You live close. It was only a matter of time." I tried to laugh it off, but she watched my face closely, like she was checking my reaction. When we said goodbye, she called my name again, and when I turned, her expression changed slightly. "I didn't forget the promise. I'm back." I smiled out of reflex, nodded, and walked away faster than usual, already trying to convince myself that it meant nothing. Valentine's Day arrived a few days later, and I tried not to think about Lena even though the memory of her words kept coming back when I was alone. That morning, a knock on my door interrupted my routine, and before opening it, I stood still, listening, feeling my heart beat harder than it should. When I opened the door, she was there, standing straight and calm, looking at me like she belonged in that space. I asked how she found my address, and she avoided the question without changing her expression. She reminded me of something we said when we were 15, about a silly promise when we were teens. We promised each other that if we weren't married to other people by the time we turned 30, we would marry each other. And here I am. I waited 15 years for this moment. Hearing it out loud made my skin crawl because it sounded serious in her mouth. I told her it was a childish joke and explained that I had a girlfriend, trying to keep my voice steady. Her reaction was immediate and overwhelming, as she started crying loudly and accused me of betraying her, stepping closer until I had to block her with my arms. I warned her to leave and said I would call the police if she did not calm down. "You lied to me! You chose someone else!" She stopped crying suddenly, wiped her face, and told me I was making a mistake, adding that we would be together forever, either alone or with no one else. Then she walked away, leaving me shaking in my doorway. "You will regret this." I almost canceled my Valentine's dinner that night, but I convinced myself that fear was not a reason to change plans, even though my hands were shaking while I grabbed my keys. I texted my girlfriend Rachel to tell her I was on my way, and she replied that I should meet her at the restaurant instead to keep the surprise. At the restaurant, time passed too slowly, and every minute without a response made my thoughts darker and harder to control. I called her phone again and again, listening to it ring until my throat felt tight. When someone sat across from me, I looked up ready to complain, but the face in front of me froze me in place. She had Rachel's hair, Rachel's clothes, and Rachel's posture, but her eyes were wrong, focused, and excited. "You look tense. Valentine's Day does that to people." Lena smiled and leaned closer, and my body reacted before my mind as fear ran through me and made it hard to breathe. My hands trembled as I told her to stop and demanded to know where Rachel was, but she laughed openly, enjoying the attention and the confusion around us. People stared while she acted calm and affectionate, touching my hand and calling me by my girlfriend's name. Security approached when I raised my voice and I tried to explain that she was pretending, that something was wrong, but Lena started crying again, playing the role perfectly. We were asked to leave, and outside she followed me, still talking about destiny and promises. "You should not have rejected me. This could have been easy. We are meant to be together, but I fixed the problem." Those last words made me feel desperate. I ran to my car and drove to Rachel's apartment as fast as traffic allowed, calling her nonstop while my fear turned into panic. When I reached her place, the door was unlocked. Inside the bedroom, I found her on the floor, tied, shaved, and lifeless, and my legs almost gave out as I realized she was gone. The walls were decorated with her hair placed carefully, like trophies. I heard footsteps behind me and turned to see Lena standing in the doorway, holding a bag and smiling with satisfaction. She told me she removed the obstacle and that now we could finally be together. When she reached for me, I stepped back and tripped, and when she grabbed my arm, I reacted without thinking, kicking her knee and pushing her away. She fell hard and hit her head, screaming my name. I ran out of the apartment and drove straight to the police station, barely able to speak, barely able to breathe, but desperate to get away from her. Lena was arrested that night, and they later confirmed that she had planned everything for years, watching, waiting, and preparing. Rachel was buried a week later, and I still visit her grave, even though it hurts every time.
The last normal thing I remember is helping my neighbor carry boxes of canned food into the community center while she laughed because one of them broke and spilled everywhere. That image keeps coming back, not because it was important, but because it proves there was a before. My name doesn't matter much. I lived alone on Alder Street, worked nights, slept during the day, and stayed out of trouble. The block was quiet, predictable, and mostly invisible to the rest of the city. That kind of place where nothing big ever happened, and people liked it that way. Claudia lived 2 houses down from me. She was younger than most of us on the block and impossible to ignore. She trained circus acts in her yard, practiced with ropes and balance gear, and turned every free space into something useful. She organized food drives, art events, and activities for kids who had nowhere else to go. I helped her often. I drove donations, fixed broken things, and stood guard when she practiced dangerous routines. It wasn't friendship in the deep sense, but there was trust, and that mattered more than small talk. The first sign that something was wrong was how suddenly she disappeared from everything. One day, she was everywhere, and the next day, she was nowhere. No texts, no calls, no notes, nothing. At first, I tried to be reasonable about it. People leave town, people change plans. I told myself not to jump to conclusions, even though that didn't sit right with what I knew about her. Days passed, and her house stayed untouched. No lights at night, no noise, no movement behind the curtains. Her mailbox filled up, and flyers she had posted stayed where they were, slowly peeling from the walls. The tension built slowly, not as panic, but as constant awareness. Every time I walked past her place, I looked longer than I should have. Every time I heard a noise, I checked the street. When the police finally showed up, the tone of everything shifted. They knocked on doors and asked questions without urgency. When I spoke to one officer, he told me Claudia had been reported missing 15 days earlier by her family. They said there were no signs of forced entry and no immediate suspects. Because of that, they were leaning toward calling it a voluntary disappearance. I felt my stomach drop when he said it, because I knew she would never leave without telling someone. A few days after the police visit, something changed that made the street feel unsafe in a way I couldn't explain to anyone else. That afternoon, I stood by my window longer than usual, watching Claudia's house, waiting for something to happen. The waiting itself was exhausting. My body felt tight, like I was bracing for impact without knowing from where. Cars passed, people walked by, and nothing broke the pattern. Then the vans arrived. 2 dark vans pulled up in front of Claudia's house just before sunset. 6 people got out, all adults, all wearing full costumes that covered their faces and bodies. These weren't playful outfits or cheap masks. They were detailed, worn, and disturbing. One wore a fox head with cracked paint. Another had a bird mask with long beak-like features. One was wrapped in fabric strips that hid their shape completely. The last one stepped out slowly, wearing a Mickey Mouse head that looked old, dirty, and damaged around the eyes. They didn't look around. They didn't talk to neighbors. They unlocked Claudia's door like they belonged there. Fear started to sink in at that moment, not sharp, but heavy. My chest felt tight as I watched them carry bags, boxes, and instruments inside. Drums, metal objects, large wrapped items I couldn't identify. That night, the sound started. Low drums, slow and repetitive, vibrating through the walls. It went on for hours without stopping, and I couldn't sleep because it felt intentional, like it was meant to be heard. Before the night I saw them in the yard, there was a stretch of evenings where the music changed. It became slower, deeper, and more deliberate. I stopped turning on my TV because it made me miss sounds I needed to hear. That night, I stepped into my yard and stood still, listening. The air felt heavy, not because of temperature, but because everything around me was quiet, except their drums. I moved to the fence and found a narrow gap between boards. My heart was racing and my hands were shaking as I leaned in to look. I told myself to remember details, to stay focused, and to stay quiet. They were gathered in a circle around a small fire. The masks looked worse in the firelight, distorted and lifeless. One of them dragged something across the ground toward a hole that had already been dug. The shape under the cloth was unmistakable, human-sized, limp. They started lowering it into the ground with care, like they were following instructions. The moment before they stopped felt endless. My breath caught in my throat and my legs felt weak. Then everything froze. The one in the Mickey mask slowly turned its head and leaned forward until its face lined up with mine through the fence. We stared at each other in complete silence. I ran. I didn't stop running until I reached my front door. My hands slipped on the handle before I managed to get inside and lock it behind me. The street outside was silent and the drums had stopped. I rushed down the hallway toward my bedroom to grab my phone, already planning what I would say to the police. The light switch didn't work, and the darkness felt deliberate. Someone was sitting on the edge of my bed. They didn't move or speak. The mask hid everything except the shape of their head. I stepped back slowly, my breathing loud in my ears, my legs shaking, but still working. When I turned toward the living room, another figure sat in my chair, facing me. Different mask, same stillness. They were blocking every path out. Panic took over completely. I ran for the front door, unlocked it, and burst outside without looking back. Across the street, under the streetlight, Mickey stood waiting. He held a knife in his hand, and dark stains covered the blade. He didn't raise it or step forward. None of them followed me. They just watched. I didn't sleep at all that night. When I finally called the police in the morning, my voice sounded wrong, even to me. They searched both houses and found nothing. No people, no masks, no signs of digging. A few days later, the group returned as if nothing had happened. They stood outside their house sometimes, watching me leave and watching me come back. Every encounter started with a pause where nothing happened, and I waited for it to get worse. They never needed to touch me again. Claudia's case slowly faded into paperwork and silence. Voluntary disappearance. No evidence. No closure. I still live on Alder Street. I don't help anyone anymore. I don't look through fences. I don't open my curtains at night. They still live there. Sometimes they stand outside, completely still, facing my house.